apartment frantically counting off mile markers for her. Then I realize that's going to do jack because she's probably drunk too. So I call 911, but I realize this guy is crazy. He's refusing to let me out of the car, so I've got to do it on the sly. It's been 40 minutes now. I'm terrified, I don't know where I am, and I don't know who this is. We're driving at over 100 miles per hour, weaving in and out of traffic, and this guy is trying to get me to hang up my phone call.
Yo, get off the phone. Who the fuck are you calling? Better not be a snitch.
He's also smoking pot, so I don't want to do anything that might provoke a violent reaction from him. Only because maybe he's been drinking too, or what other drugs does he have in his system? I start chatting to the 911 dispatcher as if it's my friend, praying that they'll catch on.
Hey, it's me. Yeah, I'm with someone right now. We're driving past... No, it's not my Uber. I thought it was, but it's not. Yeah, it's a shame you can't come and meet me and bring friends.
Thank God the operator catches on. He gets me to stay on the phone while he sends cops, and we develop a code. If I see cops, I'm supposed to casually put my hand out the window, which looks semi-normal because I'm smoking a cigarette. We pull into some random little housing complex and he busts out some powder and forms 2 lines. I now have confirmation that he does drugs, which means he's probably emotionally volatile. I relay this to the operator in code.
Oh man, I wish you were here right now. This guy just busted out the coke. You'd love it. He's taken a really big bump.
Pretty soon I could see the lights from the cop car, so I start waving my hand out the window. At this point, I don't care if he's onto me or not. I don't know if he has a weapon, but I slump down in my seat just in case things get hot. The cops surround us, get him out of the car, and then, once it's safe, they extricate me as well. They whisk me to the hospital for a drug test and evaluation, and that's where my story ends. On my way to the hospital, as I'm explaining all of this to the officer, I find out that, of this guy's 40-ish years on this earth, he's been in federal prison for 30 of them, for violent offenses. I want people to learn from my mistakes and, if nothing else, call 911 and stay on the line. I've been reading around this subreddit for a while now, and I'm a pretty keen observer, but through reading accounts of shit on here, I've become a lot more paranoid about certain things. And I think today is the day it paid off. I live in a basement apartment of a somewhat older building, at least 100 years old, I figure. There is no front door entrance to it, only 2 side entrances which tenants can use to reach the laundry room and 1 back door into the building, which only I have the key for, along with the building managers. I've only used the back door a few times, and that was for moving furniture in and out because my side entrances are impossible to use for stuff like that because the stairwell is so steep and the walls are so narrow. Otherwise, I never use the back door. Where I live, it's really snowy at the moment. Lots of ice and other stuff around. 2 days ago, when I left through my usual side door, I noticed that there was a shoveled path to the back of the building, which literally no one has a single reason to do or be back there. There was nothing back there for use. Only a door to get into my apartment, like I said. I thought this was highly suspicious, but I chalked it up to whoever the contractor for snow removal was just trying to be thorough and clearing a path to the back because surely they don't know who uses the back door or not, and they have no reason to. Anyways, ever since the shoveled snow, I've been a bit more suspicious. 3 weeks ago, someone stole my motorcycle from the driveway close to the back door, probably 20 feet away, and it's put me on high alert because were broken / not set up right, so there actually was no recorded footage, only a big camera pointing at you. 2 nights ago, I stayed up literally almost all out. I took a look at the back door and realized that the deadbolt was disengaged, which sort of unnerved me. The whole thing was highly unusual because there's no need for it to be. And on top of that, there's a key broken off inside the deadbolt, so I have literally no way to lock it at the moment, or the brick would move and I would know that someone used the door basement at 3 a.m. The laundry room is across the hall from my apartment, but no one is doing laundry at 3 a.m. unless they're a meth head, and I heard no laundry being done. I get up, or I hear the doorknob jiggle a bit, but thankfully I engaged my deadbolt before bed. I am freaking the fuck out about this at this point. Thankfully, I've sort of prepared for this Holmes. I stand back from the door and yell to the man, "I have a sub for sharing your stories. You really saved my ass." My mom was dating an abusive prick at this time. We'll call him Ian. Because of Ian and the crazy fights they had gotten into, we couldn't lock up my house at all. He had kicked in both the front and the back door to the house, and they were never fixed. My mother and Ian were at the bar all day, every day. I only told you this so you would know why the house wasn't locked up and where my parents were when this happened. This incident occurred when I was around 12 years old, and my little brother. When you opened my front door, it would put you in the living room, and you could see the back door. There was a hallway to the right that led back into the bedrooms, and that's where my brother and I were. We were in his bedroom with the door closed, playing something on a PlayStation. It was around midnight or 1 a.m. and I kept hearing strange noises, so before I left out of my brother's room, I told him to get into the closet and work on our fort so that it would be ready when I was done getting our drinks and a snack. I raised my little brother for the most part and took care of him. I had a terrible feeling, a sense of dread. I could tell something wasn't right, and this was a way to get my brother to hide without scaring him. He frightened really easily and had really bad asthma attacks, and at this time we had no inhaler or his breathing treatment machine for him. Yeah, good going, Mom. I knew if he started having an asthma attack on top of being scared, it wouldn't be pretty. Anyway, I left the back room and decided to see what was going on. I start sneaking up the hallway as slowly and quietly as I could. I was noise. I can't explain it, but the feeling that washed over me damn near made me puke. So I, of course, freeze. I have no one in this town. I don't know. Open. He sees me and the look on my face and freezes. I remember his eyes going so wide with fear because he must have heard the growl or whatever it was too. I motion him with my hands to go back into the room, and he does. I get 300+ pounds sitting on my couch with a wicked grin on his face. That grin and the look in his eyes will forever be burned into my head. By some stupid luck, the man didn't see me. I slowly, so slowly snuck back to my brother's room. I slowly shut the door and started going over my options. My little brother was already horrified because of the growling noise this man was making. I'm so thankful that he wasn't the one who saw what was out there. I mustered my brave big sister face and calmly told him that there was a man that I didn't know on the couch and he needed to be very quiet and I needed him to be brave and keep his breathing in check. My little brother adored me and looked up to me, so when I told him that I needed him to be brave, he tried his best. I told him not to move and he didn't. The first thing I tried was the window, but it wouldn't budge. It was completely stuck. I'm making myself stay calm for my brother's sake, but I know what's sitting out there. So since the window was stuck, I hear the man sing, "I know you're here." Fuck, my stomach knotted up, the hair on the back of my neck raised, and I instantly got a cold sweat. And then I hear it. My little brother had started wheezing. Asthma attack. Fuck. I hugged him, reminded him about being brave, and told him to sit still and focus on his breathing. I started frantically trying to get my beef. I immediately called the police and told them what was going on. Hysterical at this point, but still remaining quiet. The dispatcher told me to remain on the phone so she could hear what was happening, when the man started banging on our bedroom door. It had been 5 minutes into the phone call when this happened, and I could no longer remain calm. I fucking lost it and started screaming. And I mean blood-curdling screaming, the kind of screaming that would send chills down your spine if you heard it. I forgot to mention that our bedroom had the only working lock, so the door was locked and he was trying to get in and banging on the door. His banging got laughing.
You know I could bust this door down in about 2 seconds, right, little girl?
Now he's lightly knocking on the door and asking me to open it. His demeanor completely changed. I then heard a scraping at the door. what I had imagined it was in my 12-year-old head was him scraping the door with "no, please" over and over again, sobbing a bit, and this time a female officer was at the door, so I opened it. There were about 5 cops standing in the hallway listening to me being hysterical. I refused to let go of my brother at this point, but we both ran to this female officer and just collapsed sobbing hysterically. We had been so scared. It turns out that this guy was completely wasted and high on drugs. I remember the cops walking me up to him and having me stand in front of him to ask me if I knew who this man was, and I didn't. But I'll never forget standing in front of this huge man, looking into his brown eyes that were completely bloodshot and filled with hatred. I'll never forget that growling noise that he was making, or the look of pure horror in my little brother's eyes. My parents were called and investigated for leaving us alone like that and for the doors being like that. My mom is a different person now, doesn't drink, and is now married to a cop. She completely changed. I remember asking her about it later on, and she told me something that I didn't know. The man had a huge knife, so that's what he was scraping the door with. I still don't know how he didn't get to us, or why he didn't just bust the door down to get us. It would have taken one half-ass kick from him to kick the door down. It was super thin. It still creeps me out, and I've had nightmares from it. My husband doesn't understand why I get so furious with him when he leaves the door unlocked at night. I work 3rd shift, so I'll come home and the doors will be unlocked. It's infuriating because then I have to go through every room in the house and check the closets and the other places that a person could hide in. I have 2 kids and they will never, ever go through what I did. This all took place when I was around 8 or 9. I lived in one of the more poor neighborhoods of Las Vegas and had always been taught the dangers of adults with bad intentions. I had a best friend at the time, Gavin, who apparently had not been taught the same as me. Every single day, Gavin and I would walk home from school. We would go the 3 blocks from the elementary school down to his house and then finally mine at the end of the street. We had been doing this for the better half of the school year without any incidents. However, all it took was one singular moment for that to change. Gavin and I were making our regular trek from school towards Gavin's house, making jokes and exploring what we were going to do that day. It was usually watching Pokemon and reenacting our favorite scenes from the most recent episode. As we turned onto his street, a beat-up old red truck stopped on the road, and a ratty-looking older man with a salt and pepper beard stuck his head out of the grimy-looking vehicle and immediately leaned towards Gavin and I, and in a sickly innocent voice filled to the brim with worry, he asked us,
"Would you 2 help me find my dog? I think she's down the block. She likes to run off on me and I could really use your help."
I was skeptical at best. I shook my head and explained that I really had to get home and that my mother was waiting for me, but Gavin promptly said yes and ran towards the truck without a second's hesitation. I was frozen in place. The truck took off and I was left on the side of the road cursing Gavin and wondering what in the hell was I going to do now. As a child, I didn't realize that moment could have. The Mandela effect is a popular theory that suggests not only are there multiple parallel universes, but they're colliding and crossing in some way. This idea comes from the recent discovery that thousands, if not more, have false memories of certain events or facts. The most popular example, and apparently the first mention of the Mandela effect, was when a blogger named Fiona Broom brought this phenomenon to the public's attention in 2010. She explained that while at a convention, she and several others discussed that they always thought Nelson Mandela had died during his 1980s imprisonment. Once she took this idea and theory to the internet, it quickly grew momentum. People have shared examples of the Mandela effect ever since on varying platforms. Here are some of the best examples found to date. Number 15. We Are the Champions. In the car karaoke episode featuring Gwen Stefani, George Clooney, and Julia Roberts, the group sings the beloved Queen song, We Are the Champions. When the song ends, they all wait in anticipation for the "of the world" part, but it never happens. The group is shocked and confused. Millions of people recall a last slow line singing "of the world" after the climatic end, but it apparently doesn't happen. If you search live footage, album, or in-studio recordings of the song, they all simply end with "We are the champions." And pretty much every time you watch it, you feel like something is missing. Number 14. Kit Kat. Apparently, plenty of people believe that the famous candy bar used to have a dash in its name. From a grammatical standpoint, it would also make sense considering the name is two words brought together. However, if you search up or just look at the label of a Kit Kat bar, there is no dash. The brand has also apparently never had a dash in the title, as most historical information surrounding the candy doesn't mention a change of the name. Something interesting is that mutton pies served at the Kit Kat Club in London, which is an 18th century English club, was known to be called Kit Kats with a dash. Could this tiny detail be the cause of thousands having a strong mismemory, or is there more to it? Number 13. Bernstein Bears. Perhaps the most popular. I'm a 24-year-old male now, but this story takes place when I was about 14 years old. Growing up, I lived in a neighborhood on the edge of a small desert town in Southern California. Running along the west side of this town is a huge winding canyon with a small river running through it. And as a kid, me and my friends spent a lot of time running through it and exploring it. Directly across the street from the house I lived in at the time is some type of electrical station. Just to the right of that is an old field. This old field is at the top of the river bottom and then levels of more old fields after that, like huge curved steps leading down to the bottom. By fields, I mean that they were once used for agricultural purposes, but at this point they were basically just huge overgrown dirt lots. Well, one night, a group of at least 6 of us decided to go camp overnight down in the dirt lots and just told our parents that we were staying at a friend's house. We just planned on having a fire, playing some guitar, and drinking a couple of beers. Like I mentioned before, there are multiple levels here and the hills in between each level are pretty steep. But there's a dirt road that runs along the side and goes all the way down to the bottom. The road starts right next to the entrance gate of the electrical station, which is only a couple of 100 feet from the street and has a bright light illuminating the area around it. Let's just call it the entrance light. So we walked down a couple of levels and set up at the bottom of the second to last hill, not too far from the dirt road. We get a fire going, play some music, and start having a pretty cool time. We were being pretty loud though and had a pretty big fire going. So every once in a while, one of us would run up the steep hill behind us to take a look around and make sure that the fire wasn't getting too big. At some point, I walked off to take a leak. And on the way back, I decided to make a quick run up the hill to make sure the coast was clear. I take a quick scan around and see something moving around by the top of the road, which I can only see because of the entrance light behind whatever it was. I back up and move down the hill a bit so only my head is peeking over. I try to signal down the guys, but no one is paying attention to me. When I look back up, my eyes adjust more and I see what looks like the silhouette of a man, not walking back and forth, but walking in a circle, a tight circle. My first thought was, maybe they're on the phone, but then I see both arms swinging at their sides. I don't know exactly what time it was, but I remember that it was pretty late. What the hell was this person doing out here in the middle of the night by themselves, walking in circles? I can hear the guys behind me still laughing and talking. I turn back and see my friend Paul heading up the hill to see what I was doing. I signaled for him to keep low and pointed up at the person. Not long after, all of our heads were lined up peeking over the top of the hill. We were all giggling and whispering to each other, trying to figure out what the hell this person was doing. The longer we watched though, and the more we paid attention, the creepier it got. Something about the way they moved was just unnatural. We start breaking back into whispered conversation when the person stops. They turn and face our direction. The moon was out that night, but we were a few hundred yards away and in the dark, so I was sure that they couldn't see or hear us. But it really felt like they could, like they were looking right at us. I took a glance back and saw that the fire had died down some, so I know that it wasn't that. Then all of a sudden they start walking, not down the dirt road next to them, but down the rough, steep hill in front of them. Out of the light, out of sight, directly towards us. We all flipped out and went flailing down the hill. We got to the bottom and started grabbing our stuff and kicking out the fire. The only place to really go or hide was further down the river bottom, or to a large tree a little further down the road surrounded by thick bushes. I grabbed my guitar and started running towards the tree, which was maybe 100 yards away. Not even halfway there, I look over and about 30 feet away I see a tent floating across the field next to me, because someone decided that they were going to bring the whole damn tent with us to hide. It was actually pretty hilarious. You couldn't see their legs or anything. Just this big-ass tent still put together bounding across a damn field. Anyways, all of us, including the impressively sturdy tent, made it to the tree. Me, thinking that the person would be coming straight down the hill and not down the road, I went around and hid on the far side between some bushes. A minute or two passes and we quiet down. Then we start to hear very clear, heavy footsteps getting closer, but they're from the road. Me and my buddy Larry are right next to the road, only a couple of small bushes separating us. We sat there with our pocket knives out just in case, and the steps continued getting closer. I want to mention that at this point I wasn't exactly shitting myself. It was really creepy, but it was more just this bizarre thing that was happening. What happens next though, I still can't explain. And this is what still freaks me out about this night. The footsteps were loud and they were getting really close. They make their way towards the end of the bushes right next to me, of course, and they stop. They were maybe 5 feet away from us. Me and Larry look at each other in complete confusion. We just sit there, holding our knives, listening and waiting. After a few minutes of silence, I can't stand it anymore. As slowly and quietly as possible, I stand up and peek out into the road, fully expecting to see someone standing there, but I don't see anything. I walk out of the bushes and out onto the road. There was absolutely nothing there. It was so quiet out there that whoever this was couldn't have gone in any direction, or really moved at all without us hearing it. But there I stood, and there was nothing. They just vanished. I called everyone out, and we just stood there on the road, confused. Eventually, we all left because we definitely weren't going to stay there. We all ended up crashing at my house that night. One of the strangest and creepiest experiences I've ever had. I live in Columbia, Missouri. I'm 25 now, but this event took place when I was 17 and still in high school. My family used to own roughly 60 acres south-ish of Columbia that backed right up to the Missouri River. When you stood at the highest point at the rear of the property, you could see the river snaking through the bottoms. It was a sight to see, one I really miss. In my high school years, before we sold the property in 2011 when I had since left for college, I would routinely drive to the property on weekends and camp in the backfield in the bed of my truck. Our property was surrounded by native burial mounds, however, there weren't any directly on our property. What we did have was a small cemetery set back a bit in the trees towards the rear of the property. I was sitting in the bed of my truck one particular fall evening that I had chosen to head down and camp. I had brush hogged a large clearing in the field I was sitting in the weekend before. I was enjoying my sweet tea in silence of the rural Missouri countryside when, on the opposite side of the clearing that was up against the woods, close to the small cemetery we had, I noticed a figure. The moon wasn't bright on this night and I couldn't tell what exactly this thing was. However, I knew it wasn't any wild animal I had ever seen or that is native to central Missouri. It looked somewhat human, but definitely wasn't. It moved slow and awkwardly and had weird angular looking limbs. The only thing I could clearly see was its eyes when it stopped and looked at me. My God, I had never seen anything like it to that point in my young life or since. They weren't glowing per se, but I could see them clearly as if this thing wanted me to fear it just by looking at its eyes. We were locked in for about 3 seconds when it made an awful screaming type noise. The closest I could relate it to is what I would imagine gravel in a garbage disposal would sound like. That's when I decided it was time to get out of Dodge and go home to sleep. It never advanced towards me or threatened me, but when it looked at me, a feeling of dread I've never matched again washed in. The purest form of dread you can imagine. Once I had clambered my way back into the truck and started driving out, I saw it turn around and skulk back into the woods towards the small cemetery previously mentioned. I have no idea what I actually saw, but the only thing I can think of is a skinwalker considering the native burial mounds in cemetery. That explanation doesn't make much sense either, since skinwalkers are generally entities seen in the southwest United States of America, not central Missouri river bluffs. If anyone has an idea of what it may have been other than that, I'd welcome input. The Osage and Missouri tribes are the ones that inhabited this area of Missouri, just for general information. Concluding my story, as I mentioned previously, we sold the property in 2011, so I can't go back to provide any more details that may be relevant. I never camped on the property again, and whenever I did go back to brush hog or help the neighbor bale the hay, I always felt a bit of dread in that back field. I've been holding off on sharing this because I'm still kind of shaken from it. My family has always been hunters and usually stick to the same places when it comes to said hunts. My great-grandfather took my grandfather took my mom took me. It was always a good time going. This last year, during the deer and bear hunts, we went to San Juan Elk Ridge in southern Utah just like every other year. It's a really beautiful area next to a Native American reservation and another area called Beef Basin. Yeah, stupid name, right? So we set up our canvas wall tent, we being Granddad, Mom, and I, and we get camp all cozy and livable. At around 3:30 p.m., my grandpa and I went for a hike to see what we could find. With bears in the area, both of us always had guns on us. We had been here many times before and both of us knew where we were at all times. But this hike felt different, like that stereotypical someone's watching me feeling. And I could tell it wasn't just me because my fearless 67-year-old granddad was gripping his rifle a little tighter than usual. That's when I heard the whispers. Not loud enough to understand what they were saying, but loud enough to hear. They seemed to be coming from just ahead of us in a small clearing of trees. As we came into the clearing, the whispers stopped. But we saw one of the biggest bucks we have ever seen right by the opposite tree line. So, being the hunter I was, I raised my gun and aimed for his heart. Bam, first shot misses. The deer doesn't even flinch. I can hear my grandpa whispering to shoot again. Bam, second shot hits dead on. Through my scope, I can see that I hit him and I see blood pour from the wound. But the deer doesn't drop. Instead, he turns and looks at us for a few seconds before calmly walking back into the woods. "What the fuck?" I hear my grandpa say. It was good to know that I'm not crazy and that he saw that shit too. We go over to where it was and there was no blood on the ground at all, even after we saw the deer bleeding. At that point, it was almost dark, so we decided to go back to camp to talk about this immortal-ass deer. About halfway back, we hear the whispers again, but louder this time. It's obviously a man, but we still can't make anything out. We get to camp okay and sit in the tent to tell my mom what had happened. She was pretty scared and thought we should go home, which was a shit idea considering we were 8 hours south of where we lived. So we decide to just move camp the next day and settle in for bed. I wake up in the middle of the night to heavy footsteps outside the tent. You could tell whatever it was on 2 legs and very big. The full moon was out, so when whatever it was gets to the front of the tent, I could see the silhouette of something at least 8 feet tall. It was thin as a tree branch with 2 long arms and huge scraggly antlers. I see its long arm reach to the front flap and then 3 long gray fingers start opening the door. I'm scared shitless and can't move due to fear. The flap opens enough to see the thing's face peeking in. Its eyes were like a cat's, glowing slightly green. But out of nowhere it stops and just stares at me. I'm sure it knew I was awake and scared out of my wits, but it closes the flap and walks back the way it came. That's when I passed out from fear. I woke up the next morning to my granddad and mom making breakfast and I tell them about what I saw. Then my grandpa goes on to explain that what he thinks I saw was a skinwalker. I'm not sure if this is accurate, so excuse me if I'm wrong, but this is what he told me. He said they're pretty much corrupt native shaman that can shapeshift and cast spells, which would explain the deer not dropping after being shot. Or possibly a Wendigo, which are monsters that people turn into after eating other humans. I honestly think that it was a Wendigo. After I got home that week, I read online about an old mine that collapsed in the early 1900s that blocked people in that was a few miles away from where we were. I'm sure that being locked in a mine would make your buddies look pretty tasty. Either way, that was the scariest shit I've ever seen in my life. I've never been a person to think that skinwalkers are real until 1 week ago. Last week I went camping with my mom and we were in Strawberry, Arizona. We were going to be camping for the week. This story is going to make me sound crazy, but here goes. Before this incident, I had never used a Ouija board in my life. Growing up, I had an aunt who would dabble with Ouija boards and the paranormal, and my mother always advised me to never touch one. One day, my partner decided it would be fun to buy a Ouija board and use it with a few friends. I wouldn't say we were complete skeptics, but I don't think any of us were really expecting anything wild to happen. We went on the internet and looked up how to safely use one and planned out what kind of questions we should ask. So we run to Toys R Us and we pick up a Hasbro Ouija board. We didn't really want to use it at our house, so we gathered up a couple friends and I drove to a state park a few towns over. We start to head up the hiking trail and find a good spot to lay the board down. We begin going through the motions of asking if there was a spirit who would like to communicate, all the normal stuff that you would do. The planchette moved with ease. It's a really strange, powerful feeling when it glides across the board. The planchette it came with was a thick hunk of plastic, and there was quite a bit of friction when trying to intentionally move it on the board. We were all stunned at the fact that the damn thing was working. We asked if it was a good spirit. Of course, the planchette moved over to no. We then asked if it wanted to harm us. The planchette moves over to yes. My partner asked how it would go about doing this. The board began to spell out ENGINE, engine. We see a group of hikers coming up in our general direction and we carelessly put the board away without properly saying goodbye. We hike back down to another secluded area and decide to try again. This time we come into contact with a spirit who claims to be a 6-year-old boy who died sometime in the 1800s. Now, he seemed nice at first, and that was until he told our friend he wanted him to die so that he would have someone to play with. We decide to ask the board questions only we would know the answers to. Each person asking the question took their hands off the planchette to be certain. The board got every damn question correct, and that's when I started to feel a bit uneasy. I honestly couldn't believe it. The board then proceeded to spell out my name. I was confused as to what that meant. Soon after, it began to rain, so we told the board that we had to go, and asked if it would help us bring the planchette down to goodbye. It complied. We all begin walking back to my car when I noticed this woman sitting in an SUV next to mine, just watching us. Her gaze never really left, and it kind of rubbed me the wrong way. We all get in my car and I go to start it, and the engine doesn't turn over. It was almost as if the battery was dead, but my accessories still worked. I began to shit bricks. I hadn't had my car for very long and it never gave me trouble. It seemed like way too big of a coincidence. I look over at that woman and put my window down and ask her if she has jumper cables. She reaches behind her and pulls them out as if she had them ready. We get out of my car and hook them up when my partner's friend's phone rings from a number he doesn't recognize. He picks it up and it was someone just asking if we were okay. He chalked it up to the fact that a drug dealer previously had the number, so he got a lot of unknown calls. Weird. We start chatting with this woman and thank her for letting us use the jumper cables. Turns out she has the same name as me, which the board had previously spelled out. Was this perhaps a warning? She tells us that she works as an ultrasound technician at a local hospital. We ask her what she's doing in the parking lot, to which she explained that she was waiting for her weed dealer. Medical marijuana is legal in my state, so I was a bit perplexed but didn't think anything of it. I was just grateful she was helping us. I go to try and start the car and it still doesn't work. It just kind of rolls for a few feet in the parking lot before shutting off. At this point, it's getting dark and I begin to come to terms with the fact that I'll have to call a tow truck. Our friends ended up getting picked up and my partner stayed with me as we waited for the tow truck to arrive. We told the woman she could leave since she was still weirdly waiting with us. She offered for us to sit in her car while we wait because it was raining again. I asked her if she could pop the trunk so I could sit on the ledge, but she told me the trunk didn't open. So, stupidly, I get in her car with my partner. The weird woman made a joke about disabling her child safety locks on the back so I won't think she's trying to keep us here. That rubbed me the wrong way. She starts telling me that maybe I should just leave my car there and offered to give me a ride home. I politely decline. Then she tells me that she has a friend whose husband works for VW and that he could surely fix my car for a good price. She calls up her friend, and because we were in the car, it was quiet enough that my partner and I could faintly hear the other line. She explains the car problem and asks how much it would be to fix it. We hear on the other line the person ask if I'm a boy or girl. The woman says girl, and the man on the line simply said good. Nope, we get out of the car and tell her the tow truck should be there soon and thank her for the help. We gave her the Ouija board and told her she could keep it because we didn't want it anymore. I still wonder what she did with it. She kept trying to get me to give her my phone number and kept saying she would come with me to get my car fixed from her friend. Eventually, she fucked off. We ended up getting back home late. Told the AAA guy how we were fucking around with a Ouija board and met the weird lady afterwards. He said he wouldn't have picked us up if he had known that. The next day, my partner opened up his text that he sent out when we were waiting for the tow. In a conversation with his mother, the text box had, "Yes, Satan, yes," written out. The message wasn't sent, but he sure as hell didn't write that. The next day, I called the hospital to see if that woman even worked there like she had claimed. Nope. They transferred me to 2 different floors and there was no ultrasound technician working there with my name. To this day, I still don't know how to explain what happened that night. And I'm sure as hell never going to use a Ouija board again. Also, the dealer the woman claimed to be waiting for never even showed up. So what she was doing that night and what her intentions were, I'll never know. This is a story I swear I wouldn't speak of again because it still haunts all of my family to this day. This happened when I was age 9 and I'm now 16. My aunt, Sherry, wanted to live on her own with her kids. She had always lived with my grandparents. She moved to the south side of our city into this huge house. I always got the creeps from this house when I went to visit. She lived there for about 2 weeks when the weird shit started happening. At first it was toys and other stuff going missing, then mysteriously showing up in different places. Then it came to stuff being thrown from upstairs to downstairs. Being that young, I honestly thought it was my older cousins just messing with me. But every damn time I went to look upstairs, they weren't there. I started to go over to the house more and more because my aunt always babysat me for my parents. I remember this night specifically because it was the night my aunt truly knew something was going on in the house. Myself and a couple of my female cousins were upstairs listening to music and dancing when one of them told me to run the house phone downstairs. But as soon as I got down to the bottom of the stairs, my aunt came running to the staircase with a baseball bat, pulling me back up the stairs. Then she took the phone from me, calling her oldest son, Dan. Dan came over and looked around the house. However, they never did tell me what happened until I got older. My aunt said someone was staring at her through the window. The longer she lived there, the worse it got. But she stayed because she couldn't afford to move out. Whatever was in her house stayed on one floor at a time. There had to be more than one. Sometimes it was on the top floor, the main, then the basement. We would all stay in one room together because we were too scared to sleep separately. That was until someone else moved into the house with us. Kevin. Kevin and his baby daughter moved into the room that's right outside the attic door on the top floor. The worst room to sleep in. We tried to warn him. One night, some seriously scary shit was going on with high-pitched screams and shit being thrown at us. Kevin ran downstairs without thinking while his baby was sleeping in that room alone. Everything went silent until we heard the high-pitched crying and screaming come from the room upstairs. Kevin ran up with my aunt and my dad. The door seriously would not fucking open. Kevin moved out the very next day with his daughter. Finally, things calmed down until the night of my parents' wedding. My aunt was going to babysit me and I wanted to have a bath, so she told me not to lock the door in case someone needs the bathroom or something. The only thing I remember is starting the water and getting in. Then I woke up in a full tub and someone banging on the door. I grabbed my towel and opened the door to see a paramedic, police officer, and my aunt crying. She yelled at me for locking the door, but that's the thing, I didn't lock the door. My aunt finally decided to try and leave, but she needed to go back and grab blankets and clothes. It was nighttime and she went through the back door. She had this weird feeling like someone was watching her. As she got closer to the side gate, she stopped and looked through the cracks between the panels. She saw someone crawling out the basement window and standing tall watching her. She took off and yelled at my grandmother in the van to start the car. After that, we arranged for a priest to come to our house. Father James was very skeptical at first, but he came anyways because he saw fright in our eyes. He set up candles in each room and he told us he felt something evil. Much to my liking, I got stuck staying in the fucking room upstairs at the end of the hall with my two cousins Dan and Casey. Well, Dan thought it would be a good idea to say, "If anyone's in here, kick the bed Casey is sitting on." Not even a minute later, the bed was sent across the room. Father James told my aunt to leave the house immediately. The house was torn down a year later. Some seriously messed up shit happened in that house that I can't explain. I just know that it wasn't normal. Anyways, that's my story. Hopefully it helps some people in some way. This first event takes place in 2011, so I was 17 years old when this happened. I had always thought paranormal things were cool and I had always wanted a Ouija board. So my friend, we'll call her Mary, got me a Ouija board from Spencer's as a Christmas/birthday present. We used it for shits and giggles a few times, but nothing really significant happened. Until that summer a few months later when we went up to Mary's grandpa's house. A small house in a slightly woodsy area about 5 to 8 minutes from the closest town. We went up there with another one of my friends who we'll call Kayla. You know how you can walk into a house and it just feels wrong? That's how I felt sometimes, and I'd been in the house several times before when Mary and I had camped in the yard. Regardless, Mary, Kayla, and I settled in a small room Mary would sleep in when she was a child. We turned on the floor lamp, sat on her bed, and took out the Ouija board. The placement of the three of us is slightly significant, so I'll paint a small picture. Imagine a twin bed with 3 girls sitting in the middle in a triangle shape. Kayla and I sat next to each other with Mary in front of us. The board was between us with the letters facing Kayla and I correctly where Mary had to read them upside down. This is significant because of the lamp in the door. The lamp was behind and to the right of Mary, right next to the door and outlet. Now, onto what happened that evening. As the three of us placed our fingers lightly on the glow-in-the-dark oracle, we didn't really designate one person to ask the questions. Mary asked if there was anyone with us, and the oracle moved very slowly at first, then it strongly slid to yes. We took turns asking questions, most of which I can't remember. But Mary and I asked questions that only she and I knew so we could make sure Kayla wasn't doing anything to it. We then asked it what it was and if it was a ghost. It said no, so we asked if it was a demon. It said yes to that. Mary asked what its name was and it spelled out O-M-A-Z. Omaz? We all looked at each other in confusion as we tried to figure out exactly how to pronounce the supposed name as the oracle moves to yes yet again. Mary asks it why it's there and it spells out Y-O-U. All three of us are confused at that point, so Mary asked it which one of us. The oracle spelled out Y-O-U yet again. Kayla sarcastically asks if Mary is its property. The oracle moves to yes, and I remember the odd look on Mary's face. Kayla then jokingly says she's going to touch its property, and the oracle slides to no fairly quickly. Kayla then started sarcastically chanting something like, "Oh, we're touching your Mary, we're touching your Mary," and I laugh along as we both place our hands on Mary's legs. As we're laughing, the oracle flies off the board onto the wall behind Kayla and I. Usually, small plastic things such as an oracle ricochet off the walls if they're thrown, right? The oracle slid down the wall. The three of us look at the oracle, and I'm the one who eventually picks it up and places it back on the board. We don't touch the oracle and just sit there and talk, and then Kayla states that if the oracle moves on its own, she's gone. Mary, Kayla, and I talk for a bit until the lamp turns off. Mary screams and launches towards Kayla and I as we both scream with her. We huddle for probably 2 seconds before we run out of the room and into the living room. After that, we all jump into my car and run to the store to get salt and white candles. Where we went only had 2 white candles, so we had to get the rest in yellow. When we got back to the house, we poured salt in a circle around an air mattress, lit the candles in a circle, and sat there. We didn't go to sleep until we saw light outside the next morning. We looked in the room to retrieve the board and to see why the lamp went out and discovered that the bulb was fine and the switch hadn't been turned. The lamp was unplugged with the cord laying a little away from the outlet, as if someone had yanked it out. We have no idea how this could have happened accidentally, since there were no animals around. After that, we decided to get rid of the Ouija board. We ended up only getting rid of the oracle though because we couldn't find the board. To this day, we have no idea where the board is, but Mary and I could point out the exact spot we tossed the oracle. I think this is a problem because we never said goodbye. Mary and I are still very good friends, and she helped me piece together the story as I couldn't remember some details. Even today, every now and then we, more so Mary than myself, experience things that probably shouldn't happen. I can't believe I'm typing this. Please, anyone listening, bear with me. I hate telling this story. I've been having really bad nightmares the last few days, waking up sweating and crying. Not directly related, but I guess there's no better time than today to share. And before anyone talks bad, I already know my whole account sounds paranormal cliche, which is why I hate sharing it. But in my memory, this is the creepiest of the many events I have endured. And this is not some fake story. This happened to me and my family witnessed. I was in 5th grade, whatever age 5th graders are. Incredibly happy time in my life, best of my childhood. My mom and I recently moved from the High Sierra Nevadas to live with my eldest aunt in her old Victorian 15 minutes from San Francisco. I have since learned my aunt had experienced some crazy demonic shit in her 20s, and at the time, her 50s, she was deeply religious, going to church every day. She rotated between the Catholic Church and the non-denom Christian Church. Anyway, Mom and I had lived off the grid so long I was way behind in my Catholic studies. I enrolled in our local Catholic school, but I was not recognized as a full member since I had never been through catechism. My aunt insisted I be baptized. My whole family came out to watch me be baptized at the Christian church, and I got all dressed up, and afterwards the church gave me a handmade wooden crucifix. The baptism itself went uneventful in my memory. Do you denounce Satan and all his works? Yes, typical baptism. Pastor walked me into the warm pool, complete submersion. The only thing odd was afterward, many family and strangers came up to me laughing. From their perspective, I had gasped loudly enough that they thought I must have slipped into the pool and nearly drowned, but I never remembered it that way. That night, we had a small family celebration at our house. I can't remember being happier in all my short life. My mom helped me nail my new crucifix above my bedroom door. Bedtime. My bedroom was a smallish room attached to the basement. My mom and aunt had the 2 upstairs master bedrooms, and my 16-year-old cousin had the 1 small bedroom on the main floor. My other 19-year-old cousin was sleeping on the couch for the night. My mom tucked me in after we nailed my new cross above my doorway. In my room was a gigantic antique wooden armoire that came with the house. It was too huge and heavy to move, or my aunt would have had it in her room. No one could figure out a way to get it out without dismantling it. God knows how it ever made its gigantic ass in there in the first place. I fell asleep. At some point, I woke up to a massive earthquake. The whole room was shaking violently. I tried to make it to the doorway, but everything was shaking so hard I had to drop and cover. Pieces of the ceiling fell on and around me. The massive armoire moved a good 3 to 4 feet from the wall and the doors swung open and closed. My cross was forced out of the wall and landed on the floor. When the shaking stopped, I ran upstairs. I was screaming for my mom. My cousin jumped up off the couch and thought someone was breaking in. By now, the whole family is gathered in the living room and no one but me felt any earthquake. They told me to calm down and that it was just a nightmare. I screamed at them, no nightmare, this just happened. I told them pieces of the ceiling fell on me. When they all walked me back to bed, they saw the room. Cross on the floor, ceiling chunks everywhere. Now my older cousin is pissed at me, accusing me of pranking them. I was crying and they didn't believe me until they tried to put the armoire back in place. No matter how much they tried, it would not budge. It was huge and heavy, and they realized no 75-pound person could have possibly moved it that far away from the wall. They collectively could not move it back. So that was the last night anyone ever slept in that room. My aunt had the priest come a few days later. I don't remember much after, except no one was ever permitted to sleep in that room again. Hey everyone, if you enjoyed this video, you're bound to like what my friend Dark5 just uploaded. 5 real-life Ouija board nightmares. A link will be on screen and in the description. Hey everyone, this video contains 5 different kinds of stories. A crazy ex story, a drug story, a night shift story, a taxi story, and a camping story. If you can comment by the end of the video which kind of story you'd like to have an entire video dedicated to so I know what you guys want to see, that would help a ton. I've also left timestamps in the description for each story, so if you've heard a story before and you want to skip it, you're able to. Now, on to the stories. I think this story will be improved by some context about the setting and such, so here we go. First, this took place after I graduated high school and moved away from my family. I moved up to Alaska again, and I say again because I lived there before and attended college there. Second, and very conveniently, my mother had been renting out our old house instead of selling it. I say conveniently because the long-standing residents had moved away and therefore I was awarded the old house. I had to work quite a bit to keep up the payments, but my mother pitched in, thankfully. Third, at the beginning of this story, I should make you aware that I had recently broken up with a girl who had been staying with me in the old house I was renting through my mother. And this breakup was unclean and dysfunctional, much like the relationship itself was. And finally, the story begins. It was winter break, which means I would be spending more time inside than I normally would. It was somewhat lonely in the house, being without a stable girlfriend then. Also, there's no neighbors really to speak of, as the house was in an extremely wooded region a few miles out of town. One late afternoon, soon after I thought the whole breakup predicament had come to a close, I was made quite aware that it wasn't. My cell phone began ringing and ringing from an unknown number. Cliché, I know, and I decided to pick up. It was, of course, my ex. She began telling me about how great her new boyfriend is and how horrible I was and am. The sort of talk that you can almost smell the booze off the caller's breath from miles away. I was actually listening until she decided to hand the phone. This happened to me when I was a kid, probably 11. I haven't told anyone this story because we aren't supposed to talk about them in my culture. If you talk about them, they gain an attraction towards you and focus on you more. For clarification, I am a Native American male, Apache. It was near Halloween time when my friends and I were telling ghost stories. My friend said she was going to tell a story about her parents' first date.
She said she didn't like telling this story since it was actually true, but we prodded her on. To make a long story short, the parents had spent a nice, if awkward, first date, and around the time that they would have said goodnight, the male in the situation, my friend's dad, suggested that they go for a midnight hike up Provo Canyon. He apparently knew the place since he had done. Before the video begins, I'd like to mention that these are not the most in-your-face and outright horrifying stories. However, they are the most believable and most reliable ones that were sent in to me. Not to mention very creepy in their own way. I could definitely see a lot of these happening. Now that that's out of the way, let's begin. Number 1. Over the weekend, about 15 coworkers and myself had our company trip to the Stanley Hotel in Estes Park, known for being Stephen King's inspiration for The Shining. We took an 8 p.m. ghost tour where we joined about 15 other people to get guided around the property and told stories about its history and creepy things that are said to have happened. We were told to take a lot of pictures. I'm sure this was to try and capture orbs or ghosts. Many green orbs were caught in pictures, but I don't think anything is as creepy as this photo taken by my coworker. A little girl in a hot pink dress who was definitely not on our tour. And apparently years ago, a young girl who was 12 to 13 by the name of Lucy was squatting in the basement of the concert hall, which is where this photo was taken, and she was discovered upon plans to begin some construction. She was forced to leave, the night got below freezing, and she froze to death. Everyone on my tour has vouched that this girl was not on our tour. I mean, who wouldn't remember someone wearing something hot pink? The man pictured as our tour guide, no one would have been in front of him. I am convinced that this is the ghost of Lucy. Just one more added note, though I doubt anyone would believe me. But there was only one time throughout the tour where I felt any strange energy or feeling. And it was right there, heading down to the basement of the concert hall. Number 2. I used to work at a hotel, mostly night shifts from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. I worked at the front desk checking guests in and out. This particular evening, I was all caught up on laundry and I was pretty bored just watching YouTube videos. This is where everything gets pretty weird. I was in the back when the phone rang. I could see if someone was calling from inside a hotel room because the digital reading on the phone read the room number. Room 323 was calling and I picked up.
Front desk, how may I help you?
There was no response. I waited a few seconds for something, but I heard nothing. About 10 minutes later, the phone started ringing again. It was room 323. I didn't think anything of it and picked up again with the same greeting as before. As you can guess, there was no response. I waited a few seconds until I heard a small sigh. This freaked me out and I sorta yelled,
"Hello? Can I help you?"
The phone hung up. I was pretty spooked at this point. Nothing like this had ever happened before in the 3 months I was working there. I eventually forgot about it when the bell at the front desk rang. I went out to a guest who said there was someone banging on the walls and making noise. I told him I was sorry about that and that I'll write it down and tell my manager in the morning, as there's not much I can really do anyways. I asked him for his room number and he said he was in room 325, right across from 323. I looked up at him for a second when he said this, and he could tell something was off when he saw me. He asked me if everything was alright and I said yes. The guest went out for a smoke and I was pretty curious about this, so I checked on the computer to see who was staying in 323. To my horror, there was nobody checked into this room. I was very creeped out now. I started cleaning a bit and tried to make myself busy when the alarm in 323 went off. All the rooms have their own alarm. There's a panel behind the front desk where it displays all the rooms and the correlating alarms. I grabbed the front desk keys, went upstairs to room 323, and the door was of course locked. I unlocked the door and went in. It was really cold and I have no idea why. It was summer and the whole hotel was hot. This room was freezing. I turned off the alarm, locked and shut the door, and ran all the way back to the front desk, practically shitting my pants. Unfortunately, that's where the story ends, but I thought I'd share that one with you guys. Number 3. My parents were on their honeymoon to Key West. When they arrived at the hotel to check in, they were told that the room would be non-smoking. With my dad being a smoker, they requested a different room. They got the room switch and went to their room. As they got off the elevator, the smell of fresh paint was overwhelming, and down the hall there was a painter with all the necessary supplies laid out around him, and he was painting the wall. As my parents walked by him, they casually greeted him, and the painter had absolutely no acknowledgement of their presence. Whatever. When they got to their room, the smell of paint was even worse in there. So bad that it wasn't even bearable, so they decided to go to the front desk to change rooms. When they explained the situation, the attendant looked very confused and informed them that there wasn't a scheduled paint job on that floor for that day, but agreed to change their room. My parents go back to their floor to grab their luggage, and the painter is completely gone. All the supplies were cleaned up and gone within 10 minutes, and the smell of paint was completely gone as well. At this point, my parents were freaked out but didn't think much of it and go to their new room. The next morning on their way to breakfast, they overhear a tour guide talking to a group. My parents tuned in when the guide mentioned the floor that they were originally supposed to stay on. Apparently, a long time ago there was a painter on that floor painting when he fell down the elevator shaft to his death. Now, my parents don't normally believe in the paranormal, but after an event like this that they had no explanation for, it freaked them out a good bit. Number 4. My name is Alex. I'm a 19-year-old guy, and I've been working at a hotel in the US for about a year and 3 months now as a server and houseman. And so far, everything and everyone has been amazing. Nothing was unusual until a couple months after working at the hotel. Jen from Human Resources mentioned the name of a lady I had never heard before, Laura Ratcliffe. At first, I thought she was another employee, but I later found out that, well, she's the hotel ghost. To be honest, I wasn't really frightened. I was just confused because no one ever really told me or even mentioned her during the time I was working at the hotel. That is, until I started asking a couple people. A little description / background about Laura is that she was a Confederate spy born in Fairfax County in 1856. During the Civil War, she became an acquaintance of Major General J.E.B. Stuart. Long story short, she was married in 1890 and died in 1923. It is said that she was buried somewhere in the grounds of the hotel, but her grave was made in front of the hotel. They made her grave close to the hotel, as shown in this picture of the front of the hotel. Then there's the sign where it gives a brief description about her, but others say that she was buried somewhere else. I personally believe she was buried somewhere in the grounds of the hotel because, well, people have actually encountered Laura inside and outside of the hotel. I've never encountered Laura, and thank God I haven't, or else I would have panicked and left already. Anyway, some of the employees here have encountered Laura and shared a couple of stories. The following stories will be told in each employee's perspective after their name is listed. Some of these people have stories about other people they know encountering Laura. Now, on to the stories. We'll start with Amanda's stories. I started working in this hotel for about a year now as a housekeeper, but I also help the banquet department. I've had a few encounters with Laura. All the times that I've encountered her were always in the bathroom when trying to clean them. So one day I gather all of my cleaning products to go clean the bathrooms. Nothing was going on in the banquet department that day, which means that it's more probable that the bathrooms are clean. Either way, I went to go check them to see if they were clean, since it is a public area and any guest could use them at any time. Since I was only going to go check the bathrooms really quick, I decide not to use my doorstop. As I go in the ladies' bathroom, I let the door close by itself. As the door closes, I feel as if someone or something touches my hair. Then I hear what sounds like a woman giggle in my ear. At first, I thought that one of the guests might have been using the bathroom, so I decide to ask if anyone is using the bathroom. No answer. I decide to check each and every one of the stalls. Nobody was in any of them. The next story didn't happen to me, but it happened to the father of one of the employees working here. He said that one night, before going home from work, he decides to take out the trash. As he opens the dumpster, he starts to have a weird feeling as if someone was watching him. He then throws the trash in the dumpster, but as soon as he closes it, he notices a woman 40 feet away just staring at him. Keep in mind that the dumpster area is part of the hotel, so we close the gate at night. We leave the gate open at day because that's where the cargo trucks go through. Anyway, this means that no person can get through the gate at night. This woman is wearing a white dress, has black hair, and is barefoot. He decides to walk in a fast pace. He turns around and realizes that the woman is following him. Only this time, she's a lot closer. As soon as he enters the kitchen, he turns around and the woman was gone. He grabs his coat and leaves. A couple weeks after this incident, he quits and starts working somewhere else. Now for Armando's story. I've been working as a houseman in the banquet department for a while now, and all I gotta say is that I believe all the stories about Laura because I saw her. We had a function one night and I was the one who had to stay longer than the rest of the employees to clean up. Keep in mind that our department is on the second floor, so all of our equipment is all the way at the back. It was probably around 2 a.m. After I vacuumed the foyer and the room where the function took place, I bring the cart where you can place the tables. It's easier to place them on the cart than carrying them one by one to the back. Anyways, as I start to make my way to the back, I start to have a weird feeling. It was as if someone was looking at me, so I decide to look back. As I turn around, at the other side of the foyer, I notice a woman. She is wearing a white dress and has black hair. She stares at my direction for a couple of seconds, turns around and walks the other way. At that moment, I leave the cart for a bit and make my way to the direction where the woman went. When I go there, I see a different lady. The following conversation goes like this. "Hi, ma'am, did you happen to walk by this area a couple seconds ago?" "No, I've been here the whole time waiting for my boyfriend." "Oh, well, did someone else happen to walk by?" No. Why?" I quickly make an excuse that I'm waiting for someone and I leave. I then go to the front desk department and ask one of the late night employees if I could check the cameras, and they say yes. As I'm checking the cameras, there's no sign of the woman in the white dress. The only person there was the lady I talked to. The whole thing was just extremely creepy to say the least. Lena's stories. I've been working in the room service department at this hotel for a while now, and all I have to say is that I've encountered Laura more than any of the employees here. Employees aren't the only ones who encounter her though, because I know some of the guests that say that they like to transfer to a different room. When I ask them why, they say that the guest next door is taking a shower late at night or that they're loud. And then when I ask the front desk about the room next to the guest, they say that no one has checked in. Anyways, on to my stories. So my first encounter happened on my first year working in this hotel. I had my cart one night, and what I was doing at that moment was collecting all the trays that the guests leave after they eat. Most of the time, they leave the trays outside of their room. Keep in mind that it's midnight and I'm on the 11th floor at that moment. The elevator for the employees is past the elevator for the guests. As I pass the guest elevator, I hear a woman sobbing. I think to myself, what would a woman be doing outside their room at this time? I leave my cart and I quickly go check who's crying. To my surprise, nobody was there. I then check the elevator, but nobody's in there either. I start thinking that it's my mind playing tricks on me, but I start getting goosebumps. I left immediately and completely forgot about my cart. I was working one night when I receive a call from one of the guests who wanted to order some food. I make the order, and while I'm waiting for the chef to finish making the food, I prepare the tray. Once I receive the food, I make my way to the room. I knock and wait for the guests to open the door, but no answer. I could see movements through the people, but they keep walking by. At this moment, I'm thinking that they probably didn't hear me knock, so I decide to knock again. This time, I hear someone walk to the door and they hold the doorknob, but they don't open the door. I know they're at the door because I can see the doorknob move, but they still have the door closed. I decide to back away from the door, and right when I look to my left, the guest, along with his wife, are walking towards my direction. They then said to me, "Oh, I see you got here before we did. We went downstairs to get the food ourselves, but the bartender said you were already gone and that you were probably at our door, so we got here as fast as we could so you wouldn't think that we weren't in the room." I didn't tell them that I thought I saw someone or something was in the room, because if it turned out to be Laura, I didn't want them to get scared or frightened, so I said that it was fine. I gave them their food, they closed the door, and that was it. Javier's story. One night, we had a big function, so we had some contractors. Contractors are people from a company that are sent to different hotels whenever those hotels need help. Anyways, Naomi, a contractor, and I were placing dirty plates close to the elevator to send them to the restaurant kitchen so the dishwasher can get them washed. I decide to take the elevator to ask the chef about the menu for the next day. The door of the elevator opens, and as soon as I put my foot in the elevator, I hear what sounds like a woman screaming. The scary part about this scream was that it wasn't a normal scream. It was one of those screams where it sounds like someone is getting tortured. I immediately run to the banquet kitchen and stay there for a while. Even though this happened a couple months ago, that scream will forever be stuck in my head. Halloween is a special time of year for people of all ages. The holiday has become an international. Last year, around Halloween, several clown sightings were reported all over the country. Everyone was unsettled by the idea of creepy clowns standing in wooded areas and staring as cars or pedestrians walked by. It seems this year the trend has spread like wildfire, and even worse, the clowns. A while ago, I got a job at a small hospital just out of town. I was so excited as it was my first job I'd been offered since my schooling. It was just casual work, but I was still ecstatic at the chance to work there as the money was great and it was the place that I did my practicum at. Most of the time I would do 12-hour shifts, 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. Sometimes I would be given the 3 to 11 p.m. shifts. I didn't really care for those much. I was used to working late for my previous job, but I had to drive a lot further to get home and the late shifts are usually pretty slow. Another reason I didn't like them was because there was not very many people on staff and I would get lonely. Usually 4 nurses, 1 admin, me, and the emergency doctor, and that's it. Now, being in a small hospital like this one, you see some pretty strange things come in. Some people can't make it into the city, and so we've had the emergency STARS helicopter have to drop in every now and then. I've seen terrible things like whole families die from accidents on the curved country roads. I've even had people bring in animals in desperation as there was no vet nearby that was open. This one particular night, around 10 p.m., I was sitting talking with one of the RNs about a patient's chart, but mostly just wasting time until I could go home at 11 p.m. The hospital was quiet and I'd only checked around 6 people into emergency at this point. I remember I was eating my yogurt and I heard a strange noise coming from the main doors. I saw a man walking towards us. He looked mostly normal, but he had a long coat on, which was strange as it's the middle of summer and even though it's dark out, it's still relatively warm. The RN next to me sighed and got up to go to the bathroom, leaving me to tend to our new arrival. As he drew closer, the strange sound got louder and something caught the light. He was dragging something behind him that I couldn't quite make out, but I assumed it was metal by the noise it was making. It sent a shiver up my spine. He stopped at the desk and I could see his eyes were wide and his pupils were big. His face was pale and he looked like he hadn't slept in a while. I'd seen this look many times and immediately associated it with someone who was high on something. He leaned on the desk and ran his fingers through his hair, pulling at it and grinding his teeth. When people like this come in, they're usually looking for drugs. Most of the time they'll complain about a migraine or fibromyalgia, anything we can't prove the contrary of. I processed him as usual and noticed he was getting more and more irritable as time passed. Eventually, when I finished and pointed him towards the waiting area, he asked how long it would be. Knowing that the on-call doc had gone on a quick break, I estimated half an hour. That's when his whole demeanor changed. The anger on his face was obvious as he stormed over to the waiting area, which is a room in between emergency and the front desk area with doors. As he walked away, I got a glance of what he was dragging and I came to the quick realization that it was an axe. I panicked and almost called the code over the paging system, but I didn't want him to realize. I promptly called the police on my cell phone and ran down the hall to signal to the nurses that we had an issue. The police would have to come from 2 towns over, which takes on average 20 minutes. Of course, as we are all small girls, we didn't want to go near him. He was tall and muscular. Even all combined, we probably wouldn't stand a chance. I calmly walked back to the front desk and paged the doctor, asking him to call me. I waited and waited, but never got a response. I watched the man getting more and more agitated, and soon he started yelling and asking for help. I hid from him, not wanting him to come back to me, and we devised a plan to lock him into the waiting area. The glass is reinforced and the doors are heavy, so it should hold him in there until the police arrived. The plan went down without a hitch until the man realized what we'd done. He started screaming and throwing chairs around the room. He was alone, so we didn't have to worry about him hurting anyone. Then he started using his axe on the door and glass to the front desk area where we were all standing and watching. I've never been so terrified in my life, and what made it even worse was the fact that he was making some headway on the door. It was at this time that the emergency doctor walks in the front door of the hospital sipping on a drink from the Max over the road. He saw us all huddled behind the desk and quickly took charge of the situation. After getting all the necessary information, he disappeared towards the back entrance of emergency, the way that ambulances bring the patients in. He then unlocked the door of the waiting room and tackled the man to the floor when he wasn't looking. He then proceeded to tie him up with cable ties. He sat on his back until the cops arrived. I was so thankful for having the young, physically fit doctor with us on that night. I bought him coffee every time our schedules crossed as a thank you, but I don't think it would ever be enough. Since this was the second incident that went down for me as I worked a late shift, I decided to never work late shifts again. I'm now a Monday through Friday 9 to 5 worker, much safer that way. I worked at a hospital doing transport for a couple of years. The transport home base was in the basement of the hospital where all the supplies are sorted and where all the laundry is done. I hated working late nights after this incident. On this particular night, I was the only one in the basement when I heard whistling at the end of the hallway by the elevator. I poked my head around the corner, expecting to see only my coworker on duty that night. But there was absolutely no one there. I just shrugged it off, as I'm not easily scared. Nights are generally slow, so I ate some snacks and hung out in the break room for a bit. Next thing I know, I hear a loud bang. I walked into the hallway and a bed is rolling down the hall, bumping into the sides. At this point, I think that my coworker is bullshitting me. I radio him and he says he's upstairs in the cafeteria. Well, I still don't believe him and think I'll catch him in the act. I walk past the laundry room and the machines start. I pop my head in there expecting to find him, but it's completely empty. Okay, starting to get a little nervous. I walk into the laundry room and the machines completely stop. I freeze, and then I run out and head towards the elevator, and that's when I hear the whistling again. At this point, I know I'm the only worker in the basement. As I'm standing there waiting for the elevator, things start falling off of the shelves down the hall. Boxes of gloves, tissues, packages of tubes. I'm literally standing there watching them fall off one by one at the opposite end of the hallway. I shit you not, my entire body broke out into goosebumps. My hair stood on end and I had this strong gut feeling I was being watched. I was not alone. As I'm getting into the elevator, I feel what feels like someone brushing my arm. I went upstairs and found my coworker in the cafeteria and was freaking out to him. I got the fuck out of there and transferred soon after that. The creepy thing to add to it is that I usually whistle mindlessly to myself at work. It was almost as if the spirit was mimicking me. Creepiest feeling ever. Around this time last year, I was at the hospital. I had cartilage from my knee grafted to my ankle, so I had a knee the size of a football and my ankle was broken and bolted back together. The hospital was occupied to the last bed, so I shared a room with 2 elder men in the urology ward instead of the surgery ward. There was only one night nurse for up to 20 rooms, so she barely checked on us more than once a night. It was my second of 7 nights. Usually, I'm a very light sleeper, but I was drugged up to no end with painkillers, so I slept like a rock. At around 3 a.m., I woke to a light hitting my face. I thought it was the night nurse coming to empty the catheter bag off of one of the other men, as it is the urology ward after all. I turn my head to look over, but there's no one in our room. I'm still half asleep, dizzy, and can't quite focus, but I can see a shadow on the wall coming from the room's doorway. I turn my head again and there's someone standing in the doorway. It takes me another minute to focus, but then... This happened to me 4 years ago. It's by far the most extreme and life-threatening situation I've ever been in. I'm not writing this to evoke sympathy or pity. My story is a testament to the grim reality that creepy, demented, and twisted people exist in this world. The eyewitness account you're about to hear is 100% true. For some understanding, this happened in the United States. It was the summer of 2012. My longtime boyfriend and I had recently gotten married. Even though we were dirt-poor college students and lived in a dinky apartment, we were having a blast. That particular summer, we gathered with our friends at the local movie theater almost every weekend. Luckily for us, there was one just down the street from our apartment that had really cheap movie tickets. A night out that was under $10 was certainly within our budget. Anyway, one Thursday night I received a call from this group of friends inviting us to watch the midnight premiere of the newest Batman movie. I had just finished working a 12-hour shift and was pretty tired. I almost refused the invitation and thought of crashing in my apartment instead. However, I didn't want to miss out on the fun, and it was a movie I'd wanted to see for a while anyway. Certainly it wouldn't do any harm to stay up later than usual and miss a few hours of sleep, right? At 10:30 p.m. we all met at the theater. We passed large cardboard cutouts of Catwoman and Batman as we walked inside, greeted by the smell of buttery popcorn and the chatter of excited moviegoers. The ticket booth was to the right of the entrance, and just above that was an electronic list of movies being played. The 12 a.m. showing of The Dark Knight Rises was displayed up there in bright red letters. Being paranoid that the tickets would sell out quickly, one of my friends swung by earlier that day and purchased tickets for all of us. We bypassed the ticket line and went straight to the ticket taker. She smiled at us and kindly directed us to Theater 9, which was on the right side of the lobby. If only I had known what I do now, that among the crowds a killer was lurking. That as I walked across that tacky red and purple carpet towards Theater 9, I could have been walking to my death. I would have turned around in that instant and gone home. I would have never gone to see the movie at all. But, of course, I had no way of knowing what was about to happen. Oblivious to the peril I was putting myself in, I pushed open the doors for Theater 9 without giving it a second thought. The hallway in this theater was shaped like a U, and you could go either right or left. Theater 9 was the largest screening room in the building, perfect for accommodating the crowds that midnight premieres brought in. The screen was motionless and gray. Not even the previews had started yet because there was still a good hour and a half to go until the movie actually started. We entered on the right side, so all the seats were to the left of us. I remember being surprised at just how packed the theater already was. Just about every seat was filled, much to our dismay. At first, it even seemed like we wouldn't find a spot to sit together. Now, the way this theater was set up, there was a section of seats right in front of the screen. This area was flat, and there were about 5 rows of seating in this section. A lot of the seats in that section were empty, but sitting right in front of the movie screen sucks, and none of us wanted to sit there. One of my friends then spotted a row with 5 empty seats all next to each other, perfect for the amount of people we had. These seats were about 3 or 4 rows up from where the seating rows start to elevate. We ran up the stairs before someone could take the seats and filled in. My husband, Brock, sat in the 5th seat. I sat next to him, and my friend Samantha sat next to me on my right side. Her boyfriend, Tommy, sat next to her, and another friend named Leo sat in the aisle seat. We spent the next several minutes casually chatting, joking around, and laughing. After a while, my 3 friends went to the lobby to buy drinks and that addicting movie theater popcorn. While they were gone, Brock and I passed the time by people watching. The theater was bright since the lights weren't dimmed yet, and I could see everyone clearly. There were a lot of people dressed in Batman t-shirts and hoodies. One person even had a mask and one of those shirts with an attached cape. There were a lot of kids in attendance as well, which wasn't surprising because even though it was a Thursday night, it was summer vacation, so that meant that there was no school the next day. Of all the people I saw, the person I will never forget was the little girl sitting in our same row a few chairs away. She was really cute, blonde with blue eyes, and passed us several times on her way to the lobby, each time coming back with various snacks and popcorn. Overall, people seemed very excited to see the movie, and the room was filled with energy and laughter. After what seemed like an eternity of waiting, the lights started to dim and the previews began. Just like every movie I've seen before, a quick animation flashed across the screen reminding us to get refreshments from the lobby, to silence our cell phones, and to make sure we knew where the emergency exits are. The animation had this ugly CGI cat in a tuxedo that was sitting in a movie theater. I casually glanced at the bright green emergency exit signs that were on the left and right sides of the movie screen. I didn't think much of the reminder like usual. After that, I only remember one preview for The Man of Steel. The others I'm not sure what they were about. When the movie started, the theater erupted into cheering and clapping. The title of the movie, The Dark Knight Rises, exploded onto the screen. This was followed by the scene where Bane is hijacking a plane. I thought this scene was pretty cool and it caught my interest right away. Only when the movie started to get a little less interesting did I remember just how tired I was. I decided I would close my eyes at the more boring parts to get a little bit of rest. I had been awake for 20 hours at that point, so I was rightfully sleepy. My eyes were closed for most of the duration of Batman and Catwoman's encounter. I don't really remember what was going on in that part of the movie. Perhaps some of you have seen it and know what I'm talking about. Anyway, when I opened my eyes again, Bruce Wayne was on his computer digging up information on Catwoman. This is the last scene I saw. I never got to watch the rest of the movie. All of a sudden, a loud bang erupted from the left side of the theater. I sorta screamed a little because it startled me. A strange smell started to fill the auditorium. It was like the smell of a firework, so I thought it was a cherry bomb or something like that. Had someone thrown fireworks into the crowd as a prank? Then, down near the right side of the movie screen, the dark silhouette of a person caught my attention. They were just a black frame against the bright movie screen. A series of flashing lights was coming from this person. It was a weird moment where time literally slowed down and everything went strangely quiet. I was completely frozen, unable to move and really unable to think at all. It was like my brain had stopped working entirely. Brock caught on immediately to what was happening and he grabbed me. He pulled me to the ground and lay on top of me, shielding me with his own body. At this point in time, sound returned to me. I could hear the gunshots ringing out across the theater. People were screaming. The movie was still playing on top of it all, creating a chaotic explosion of sound. I realized the flashing lights I had seen were bullets flying out of a gun barrel. An instant sensation of adrenaline flooded my body. There was absolutely nothing I could do except lay there and hope to God that the bullets I heard ripping through seats and walls wouldn't go through me too. At one point, shrapnel hit my head, cutting off a good chunk of my hair. And as I reached for the spot to make sure it wasn't bleeding, hot pieces of metal fell into my hand. I was lying face up so I could see everything that was happening. The lights from a still-playing movie danced across the ceiling and walls. My friends were on the floor with me. Our unfinished bucket of popcorn was spilled all across the floor. Leo had his legs sticking out into the aisle because there wasn't enough room for him to hide completely behind the seats. At some point, Samantha's water bottle, which had been in a cup holder between our seats, exploded. Water splashed all over my face. The smell of gun smoke was overwhelming. Riot-grade tear gas made me cry and caused me to cough uncontrollably. There was another smell too. The horrible metallic smell of blood that I'll never forget. I remember my lower body feeling wet all of a sudden. For some reason, I thought this came from the leaking water bottle, but I soon realized this wasn't the case. All of a sudden, things went strangely quiet. The bullets had stopped for some reason. Tommy shouted for us to get out of here. We took advantage of the opportunity and made a run for it. We ran down the stairs across the front of the screen towards a bright green exit sign. We crammed into a small closet-like space where the door was. It was so dark we had a hard time finding it. We were screaming and slamming on the walls to find the door, blinded by the tear gas and dumbfounded by shock. Then, finally, my hands felt the metal door handle and I pushed against it with all my strength. The door flew open and the light of a nearby streetlight flooded our eyes. We had pushed against the door so hard that we all fell over onto the concrete. Samantha lost her pink flip-flops just outside this doorway. As I scrambled to my feet and literally ran for my life, I realized my legs were red. They were absolutely soaked with blood. It was like I dipped my legs into a bathtub full of it. I checked my body all over and I realized I wasn't injured at all. Where did this blood come from? I looked behind me and realized that the blood was my husband's. He had been shot in the leg. A massive gaping hole had ripped through the lower half of Brock's right leg. His foot was barely hanging on and dangled lifelessly. Leo and a young man I didn't recognize were carrying Brock because after falling outside the door, he lost all of his strength and couldn't walk. I was completely shocked. I had no idea he had been injured, especially since he was right behind me the whole time and managed to escape the theater all by himself. How he did it on one foot, I'll never know. At this point, I screamed. My scream was so loud that it alerted nearby construction workers. The construction workers were doing road repair on this street, but as soon as they heard my scream and saw us running, they stopped working and watched what was going on. I'm not sure why this is such a vivid part of my memory. Anyway, they carried Brock along the back sidewalk all the way to the end where the corner of the building is. This was quite a distance, several dozen feet. My husband then collapsed from exhaustion and pain, saying he couldn't move anymore. He laid down and a puddle of blood started to form beneath him. I looked back and realized we had left a trail of blood leading from the door all the way to our current position. I was trembling. I knelt beside Brock and glanced around to see who else was injured. Tommy had been shot in the knee and the hip and was further away in the parking lot. The teenager who helped my husband was also injured. His dad and mom were with him. His mom was sitting against the wall and looked like she was going to pass out. She was bleeding from several places. That family escaped at the same time we did. I guess they heard the bullet stop and decided to make a run for it too. We were all lucky because the shooting was still going on inside. I had to take off my shirt and use it to stop the bleeding. I'll never forget how lifeless and limp his leg felt, and I imagine that's what a dead body must feel like. I got blood all over my hands and arms. The police showed up really fast. I'd say we were only outside for a minute or two before the red and blue sirens filled the night and rushed to our location. It probably helped that we were literally a block away from the police station. A female officer stood by us the whole time until paramedics arrived, which took a very long time. Brock was one of the last to be taken to a hospital. He was bleeding out for almost 20 minutes before an ambulance pulled up on the same street with the road work. At this point, he had become almost unresponsive and was on the verge of unconsciousness. Several massive guys rushed across the grass with a stretcher, loaded him onto it, and then ran with him back to the waiting ambulance. I wasn't able to go with him because there was another injured person in the ambulance and it was too crowded. I wandered around to the front of the theater alone, unsure of where my friends had went. My blood-stained shirt and a pool of blood were left behind on the corner of that sidewalk. Walking through the crowds felt like a dream. I couldn't believe what just happened. People were in hysterics and crying everywhere. A lot of people, such as me, were covered in blood. And, like me, I'm pretty sure the blood staining their skin and clothes wasn't their own blood. A lot of people seemed to notice how lonely and dazed I looked, so they kept me company and even offered me a ride to different hospitals to find Brock, because I hadn't been told what hospital he was taken to. I hung around these people for a while as police swarmed the area and asked us what we saw inside the theater. The whole parking lot was on lockdown and we weren't going to be allowed to leave anytime soon. It was around 2 a.m., so it was very dark outside still, and I was pretty cold, wearing only an undershirt and shorts. The flashing red and blue lights of what seemed like 100 police cars were blinding. I remember seeing a big police vehicle pull up that said something like Crime Scene Investigation Unit on it. I think that's when it really sank in and hit me. I started to get sick to my stomach and wanted to vomit, but somehow I was able to hold it back. Eventually, police started letting people leave. I jumped into my truck and booked it out of there. I was going 90 or 100 miles per hour through red lights in residential areas without even slowing down. Stupid, I know, but I was desperate to learn the fate of Brock and Tommy. I was in such a panic that I didn't even think to go back to my apartment, grab my cell phone, which I had forgotten, and call my parents or someone to come and help me. I was angry, upset, scared, and most of all, still in a state of shock. Was I really going to lose Brock only a month shy of our first wedding anniversary because of some psychopath with a gun? Thankfully, by the time dawn rolled around, I found the hospital he was treated in. This was in the next city over, maybe 45 minutes from the theater if you're going the speed limit. I was so happy to be there, and the hospital staff were all so welcoming and understanding. After making sure I wasn't injured as well, they let me wait in the ICU room that Brock would be placed in when he was done recovering from surgery. I was so glad that he was alive. Brock and Tommy both had survived, though many others weren't so lucky. I found out the following day, after some much-needed sleep on a hospital couch, that 12 people were killed in this shooting and over 70 were injured. I remember they first thought 15 people were killed, but the real number was 12. The little blonde girl sitting in my row didn't survive. She died in the theater no more than a few feet from us. She had been shot multiple times. A heartbroken police officer who cried during his court testimony tried unsuccessfully to save her by carrying her out of the theater and having her sent to a hospital. Tommy was rushed to a different hospital in the back of a police car. He underwent surgery and made a full recovery. The bullet missed his hip bone and narrowly missed his urinary tract and bladder. According to the surgeons, my husband lost almost half his blood. Brock made it to the hospital just in time. Any later and he would have died. He underwent several blood transfusions and was in the hospital for 21 days. The wound to his leg was severe enough that they had to amputate it after trying unsuccessfully to save it. It's been so long since the shooting happened that my husband, friends, and I have been able to recover from it somewhat. The event was pretty horrifying and left us scarred for sure. I wouldn't consider that part of the story to be creepy though. No, the creepy part is the shooter himself. I later learned much about him from the murder trial that would follow in the coming years. Though my encounter with this man was very brief, he has affected my life greatly. Just to know that people like this exist is disturbing. He's certainly one twisted individual that I never want to see again. I learned everything from watching the televised trial that took place in early 2015. This guy was going to school for neuroscience or something in California. I guess he was a pretty smart guy. However, for some reason he had an obsession with killing people and had a stalker mentality. After dropping out of his university, he moved to my state and chose my local theater to commit a mass shooting. Before that, he was planning on hiding along remote hiking trails up in the mountains, jumping people, pulling them into the woods and killing them there. Though he never went through with that idea. He stalked my theater for months and had this shooting all planned out for the night of July 20th. Though I never saw him before this, it's unnerving to think that this guy could have been watching us every time we went to the theater, and we would have never known it. We were completely unaware of what he had planned against us. This completely ruined my sense of security because who knows what the stranger next to you is planning on doing to you. I came very close to the shooter, but I never actually saw his face in person until I was forced to testify in court. Of course I saw his mugshots on television, but while in the theater I only saw him as a dark silhouette in the shadows, like a demonic figure rendered from the darkest and most sinister nightmare. He was even in the hallway that we passed upon running for the emergency exit. The only thing stopping him from killing us then and there was his jammed assault rifle. To commit this crime, he ordered a few thousand rounds of ammunition, riot gear and armor, tear gas, an assault rifle, and a shotgun. He took pictures of himself, which were shown in court, wearing all of his gear like some sick trophy and holding up these weapons with a menacing smile. He dyed his hair orange and put in these creepy black contacts while making devilish faces into the camera, something that made me sick just looking at. Before driving to the theater with all this gear in his car, he booby-trapped his entire apartment and set it to explode if anyone opened the door. Then, once at the theater, he posed as a moviegoer and even bought a ticket for the movie. I think his ticket had Theater 8 on it, which was next door, but Theater 9 had more people in it, so he went into number 9 instead. He was in the few front rows. I must have passed him several times in the lobby while he was there. Maybe he had seen me too. At some point during the movie, he got up and went through the side exit, which didn't have an alarm for some reason, kept it propped open with something, then went to his car to put on all of his armor and grabbed his weapons. Then he came back inside and started shooting. When we escaped the theater, we ran past his white car, which was parked right at the exit. We didn't even notice it. At some point he came outside and he would have seen us there on the concrete. I don't know what stopped him from shooting people that were outside too. but he could have easily ended us there and then if he wanted to. I think the hardest part for me was facing this twisted individual in court. I'll never forget rising as they called my name, walking down the center row past my family, other survivors, and crowds of news-hungry media personnel. I sat right across from him, maybe only 10 feet away. While his orange hair was gone and he wasn't wearing any black contacts, being so close to him was a creepy and uncomfortable experience. My encounters with this man are certainly ones I will never forget. I can now say that I've come face to face with a true, deranged psychopath. He just had this blank stare in his eyes the whole time. If eyes truly are the windows to the soul, then his soul was filled with nothing but a cold indifference for those he had murdered and harmed. He wouldn't even look at me. Sitting across from him in court was the second time I had knowingly been in the same room with this man. A man who tried to take my life, but thankfully failed. A man who would end up spending forever behind bars when, at the end of it all, he was sentenced to 3,318 years in prison for his crimes. This is to the man who tried to kill me. The man who has caused countless nightmares and fueled the fires of my paranoia. The man who hurt my friends and family, causing years of untold grief for my husband because he will never walk the same again. The man who stole the innocence and joy from a 6-year-old child who went into that theater alive and came out dead. To the man who carried out the worst mass shooting in Colorado history. I hope we never meet again. Ever. I hope you rot in prison. Hey everyone, hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, I'd appreciate if you could give the video a like. That's not something I usually ask for, but it's not every day you get such an interesting, well-written, and horrifying story from a survivor of something that changed the world. Now, for the skeptics who are going to ask questions, I'll clarify a bit on the story. This story was posted to Reddit and verified, which isn't an easy thing to do, especially for a story like this. I'll read a quote from one of their mods. Since a number of people are questioning how this was verified, I'll elaborate a little. Before posting, the writer messaged the mods asking that we verify her story before she posted it. She provided proof of identity, which I was then able to match to a list of survivors and to court records. Absent any conflicting evidence, I'm convinced that she was indeed in the theater that day and that this is an accurate depiction of her memories. As always, we only provide the verified flair when we're very certain that an event did happen to someone. We don't take someone just on their word. So that's what the Reddit mod said. I'd like to add that I couldn't include all the pictures I wanted to in this video due to YouTube being a bit vague on their rules lately. If you'd like to look up crime scene photos from the incident while listening to the story again, it's very interesting. Everything from the pink flip-flops mentioned to the blood trails from her husband can be seen. And just so everybody knows, the writer has given me permission to narrate and put this on my channel. I personally learned a lot that I didn't previously know about after reading her first-person recount of what happened that day. And I hope that this story does the same for many other people and helps better understand what happened not only in general but from a different perspective. Lastly, real quick before I end the video, I'd like to mention YouTube added these end card things. You should be looking at a few of them on screen right now, hopefully. I'm not really used to it yet, but apparently people on mobile and desktop can click them on screen to visit my t-shirt shop or visit other videos of mine. I think it's pretty cool and you should check it out. Buy my merch. Anyways, thanks again for watching the video. And I really want to thank the writer personally for writing the story and allowing me to use it. If you want to express anything to the writer and survivor, feel free to do so in the comments nicely. Also, once again, I'd really appreciate if you could give the video a like. Social media and everything else in the description. Stay safe and have an awesome day. Before the video begins, I'd like to state a few things. This video contains some very disturbing and violent stories coming from multiple emergency workers such as police officers, EMTs, and firefighters. Some of them only shared one story, while others shared multiple, which is why some might seem connected. Some of them are short stories while others are longer. I ask that you please respect them in the comments as these were very traumatic experiences for them. I hope that this video spreads awareness on how hard their jobs are and some of the things that they deal with. If you can't handle extremely gruesome stories, this may not be the video. One of the first things I noticed was a car seat and stuffed animals all over the road. My heart skipped a beat. I had just become a father myself, and that was all I could think about. Luckily, the driver of the SUV didn't have his kid in the truck when he decided to drunkenly run the red light. Both the semi-driver and the drunk survived, but when the semi hit the truck, it somehow knocked off the hood of the SUV, and it skipped and rolled and found its way to a motorcyclist 3 cars down from the intersection and killed him instantly. His wife said he just got back from Iraq, and one of the first things he spent his money on was a motorcycle, and he was just out enjoying an evening ride, just happy to be back home. That's a horrible thing. Finally getting home after months and months of hardships just to be killed by a drunk driver. I always considered myself one of the easygoing police officers that let people off the hook and just wrote warnings. But after that, God forbid I catch a drunk driver. Number 2. The worst one for me was an attempted suicide. Not because of the victim, who had very superficial cuts to her wrist, found naked, and was extraordinarily intoxicated. Her 9-year-old daughter, though, that was what hurt. She was sitting in her nightgown, huddled on the floor of the bathroom, her mom's blood all over the floor and her nightgown. The only thing she said was,
"She made me watch. She said it was my fault. Will she be okay?"
That one still hurts. Number 3. Got a call around 2 a.m. for an unknown medical, which is always a kind of uh-oh thing for us. As soon as we pulled up, all the cop had to say was, "Well, I don't even know." Walked up to a lady unconscious in front of her house that had her face cut similar to the Joker and her throat slit. She was in her pajamas, no bag, no ID, no belongings at all outside. Her door was locked and there was a dog barking inside. All the lights were off. No one knew what the hell happened, and no one seemed to know any information about this lady. No name, no age, nothing. She was alive when we got to the hospital. I hope she's alright today, but I often wonder who did that to her and why. Number 4. The next 5 or so stories are from the same person. I work the other side of the radio. Police, fire, and EMS dispatcher and 911 non-emergency call taker for 4 years now. Calls with kids are the worst. After a while, most calls start to run together in your head. Drunks, domestic disturbances, drivers with road rage issues. But the calls with kids, those tend to stick with you. There was this 12-year-old girl whose father shot and killed her mother, attempted to kill her, then shot and killed himself. The kiddo, covered in blood, ran to a neighbor's house for help, where they made her call 911 herself as they didn't want to get involved. Number 5. There was an unresponsive 18-month-old boy called in as a drowning that I couldn't get back. Turned out, Daddy had killed him, severe blunt force trauma to the head. To this day, I still remember telling that son of a bitch that he'd done a good job listening to my CPR directions while emergency responders were on the way. Number 6. There was a fatality car fire that initially came in as a brush fire in a field. 5 calls in, and passerby are now saying it's a car on fire. Next caller says there's a man on fire rolling around on the ground outside the car screaming for help. We were on scene with fire crews and medics in less than 5 minutes. Vehicle was fully involved and burning too hot to do anything but fight to control. The male was incoherent and flown via helicopter to a hospital. Once the fire was out, we found the remains of a toddler girl still strapped in her car seat. That one stayed with all of us for a while. Number 7. There was a beautiful 17-year-old girl whose mother left her home alone for the weekend after a verbal altercation. The mom knew the daughter had a history of depression and suicidal ideation and left her alone to think about what she'd done. The daughter hung herself in the garage with an extension cord. She used a metal garden arbor as her anchoring point. She was at least a day dead, and we had to pry her hands loose from the sides of the arbor where she tried to pull herself back up after she'd jumped. The table behind her was covered in scuff marks and footprints where she'd almost managed to swing her legs back up and under her again. It was profoundly sad. Number 8. There was a man trapped inside a burning vehicle, unable to get out. I wasn't the one to take that call. My coworker stayed on the line with him while the guy burned to death. Because there was nothing else to do other than to be there with him, my coworker was able to keep it together while he was on the phone. As soon as the call disconnected, he vomited at his console. You never forget the screams a man makes while burning to death. It doesn't even sound human. I love my job, I love my coworkers, and I love what I do. But if you don't learn early on how to leave work at work, how to not carry that shit home with you, you'll go crazy. You won't last. Most people who make it as a first responder end up with a terrifically bleak and warped sense of humor. There's a reason for that. Number 9. Christmas Eve, I respond with fire and EMS to a full arrest. It was called in as a witnessed collapse. She was in her 50s. We work her for 15 or 20 minutes and rush her to the ER. We later find out that she had been dead for hours. Her father had been the one to call. He had Alzheimer's and had seen her fall and forgot about it for a few hours. So not only did this man's daughter and caregiver die on Christmas Eve, but he had witnessed the whole thing. It's horrible to think that he may have discovered her multiple times. Number 10. I'm an EMT and had a call for a pedestrian hit by a car on a rural road. We haul ass over there and find a 12-year-old female in the road with her dad standing over her. She was riding her bicycle in her driveway with her whole family out in the lawn. She rode into the road and was immediately hit by an older man driving a large old Cadillac. The car was driving at 55 or 60 miles per hour, and because of the bicycle, this girl hits the windshield, but her head hits the passenger side column. The girl doesn't die on impact and is instead bleeding out through a large piece of her skull that has been half caved in. The girl can't talk, but she's blinking and making sounds. Her dad, who had been drinking for the better part of the day, sees the whole thing. He immediately runs out into the road and starts doing the only thing he's ever seen from TV, CPR. Thanks to his woefully drunk version of CPR, he not only crushes her ribs and lungs, but effectively helps her bleed out faster. To make things worse, I have a brand new paramedic with me who has never seen anything like this. Almost as soon as we arrive, this girl has no pulse and blood is everywhere. A volunteer firefighter showed up on scene and is trying to pull the dad off the girl. The dad and the firefighter get in a full-on fight. We get there, assess her, and try to control the bleeding, but she's gone. No pulse, massive trauma, no lung sounds, head caved in, laying in a pool of blood bigger than she is. Her whole body is just broken. Another EMS unit shows up and it takes me and the other crew to pull my partner away from the girl, who is gray. As soon as we pull him away, the father begins screaming about losing his little girl and runs into his house. The older man in the caddy, realizing she's dead, begins yelling things like, "Oh my god, I've killed a little girl." Then things get worse. The old man in the caddy who hit her falls down on the pavement and has a massive heart attack. He dies an hour later. Meanwhile, Dad is inside the house drinking some kind of whiskey as fast as he can before coming back out, bottle in hand, completely out of his mind and attacking things in his yard. The girl wasn't an only child, she was the second youngest of 6, and all of them were outside watching all of this go down. Other units arrive on scene. We end up transporting the dad, the driver of the caddy, and the volunteer firefighter who sustained injuries from holding back the dad. I now go out of my way to avoid that stretch of road. My partner quit a week later. Number 11. Another notable call was what was called in as an attempted suicide a few years back. A literal bloodbath. According to the husband, his wife locked herself in the bathroom with a knife and tried to kill herself. He said he was unable to open the door to help or stop her. We got there, door was unlocked, lady had her throat cut open and both wrists were severely cut. I don't believe for 1 second that this woman did this to herself. Not for a second. I don't believe anything ever came of it, and I have no clue what happened to the woman. Number 12. This one isn't really creepy or scary, but I think it's pretty cool and worth sharing anyway. We had a CPR job for a man in his 50s. We got a pulse back on the way to the hospital, but usually we don't hear anything about the patient after that. I attended a funeral for someone unrelated to this patient about a year ago, and I saw the guy that was dead on my ambulance just hanging out standing right next to me. It was definitely a what the fuck moment, but it was really cool to see him alive. Number 13. I've seen some pretty gruesome murders and accidents. Saw a woman stabbed over 50 times, a guy whose head was completely caved in by his steering wheel, and plenty of suicides via shotgun to the mouth. The one that stands out to me the most wasn't fatal, and it wasn't even that gruesome. Basically, some guy got high on PCP and thought everyone was a demon. An older woman in her early 60s was driving by and he decided to fight her, pulled her out of her car and pummeled her face. Knocked her teeth out, bruised her face, and gave her brain damage. She was conscious throughout the entire ordeal, and I was the first on scene. We had to fight the guy for a good 3 minutes until we got him into custody. He was a big guy and got roughed up pretty good, but he was feeling no pain at all. My taser had absolutely no effect. We only got him into cuffs when 6 officers held him down and pulled his arms into place. He then proceeded to spit blood on us. This whole thing shocked me because this lady was just minding her own business when this asshole decided to ruin her life. It was random and unprovoked. And if I'm not mistaken, she had to quit her job due to memory issues from the brain injury. Number 14. My friend's dad is a cop and he once told me this story. Keep in mind this was during a really bad ice storm a few years ago and in the country about a good 15 or 20 minutes from a town, and it wasn't a very busy road. I got a call from a woman saying she hadn't talked to her mom in a few days, which was weird since they talked every day. I went to go check on her and drove up to the address and saw a truck sitting in gate. I got out and walked up. I didn't see anything in or around the truck and decided to walk past. That's when I saw it. An old lady was by the mailbox. She fell into a puddle and had literally frozen over. Fire department had to come to basically burn her out. I then decided to walk up to the house after calling in what happened. The door was slightly open and I walked in and announced myself. No answer. I walked around and her husband had died staring out the window at her. He was handicapped and in a wheelchair. He didn't have any power in the house for a week and didn't have a cell phone. He died watching his wife freeze to death. Number 15. My grandfather was a fireman for the local Air National Guard. He knew a few of the pilots and became pretty good friends with one of them. One day, he's on duty and they get a call about one of the jets, a F-4 or F-100 at the time I believe, with an engine problem. The plane was circling the airport trying to get a safe approach. Long story short, he ended up crashing and, as you can imagine, jet crashes rarely end well. The fire squad arrived on the airfield to a pretty large debris field. Nothing was identifiable, but my grandfather knew his friend was in the plane, so he started searching frantically. Eventually, he found a gray round object in some rubble far from the crash. He picked it up, only to realize it was his friend's helmet. Knowing this was not a good sign, he slowly turned it around and saw that his friend's head was still inside the helmet. No body anywhere to be found, just his head in his helmet about 100 yards from the crash site. One would think that this would turn you away from firefighting, but he had it in his blood. He went on to be captain of a local fire department where he witnessed a lot of other things, including a woman who had committed suicide by lighting herself on fire, children drowned in pools, his best friend / neighbor cutting his brachial artery with a chainsaw, and performing CPR for 30 minutes on that same neighbor while waiting for an ambulance to come after the young neighbor boy who came over crying because he couldn't wake his dad up. There are a ton more that I can't even remember right now. Through all of this, he said there was one thing that kept him going, and that was the one day where he had the opposite of a horror call. Instead, it was a woman in labor, very in labor. They weren't going to make it to the hospital in time, so my grandfather ended up delivering the baby in the back of his ambulance. This, he said, made his 30-plus year career all worth it. Audio recording devices have been around for well over a century now, and some pretty horrifying things have been captured as audio files and tapes. Here's a list of the top 5 most disturbing audio recordings along with their backstories. Keep in mind that I really need an intro. This story is told from an 18-year-old French female's perspective. The story I'm about to tell happened to me almost 2 years ago. A friend of mine, her younger sister, and I had decided to go shopping one afternoon. My friend's mother was nice enough to drop us off at the mall since we were all too young to drive at the time. She said she would pick us up around 6 p.m. and that she would text us where she'd park so that we could meet her. At 6:12, my friend received a text that her mom was waiting for us in her car in the underground parking lot. She then gave us the lot number so that we could find her. It might sound careless for 3 girls to roam around an underground parking lot on their own, but we knew the place well and it wasn't the first time we had to walk through it. My friend and I were in the middle of having coffee when she received the text, and her sister was making a big fuss because she was tired and really wanted to go home. My friend finished her coffee and we didn't want her sister to cause a scene, so I told her it was fine and for them to go and that I would join them in a few minutes. After I finished drinking my coffee and paid the bill, I headed for the parking lot. I should say that this happened in winter, so it was already dark outside, and of course, so was the underground parking lot. In addition, it was also late, so the place was completely deserted. However, I knew my friend's mother's car was less than 250 meters away, so it wasn't a long walk. After a few seconds of walking, I heard footsteps getting closer and felt like someone was behind me. I know that underground parking lots are not the safest place to be, especially for a girl, but I decided to stay calm and walked over to a car as if it were my own, thinking that whoever was behind me would walk away. Still, I pulled out my phone and pretended like I was texting when, in fact, I used my phone to take a picture of who was behind me in the reflection of the car window. The picture will be on screen right now. I didn't have enough time to react though when I felt a hand grab around my wrist and pull me to the side. I was thrown down on the hood of the car. I knocked the side of my head in the process and my vision was blurry for a few seconds. I had a metallic taste inside of my mouth, and I later found out that with the blow, my teeth had cut inside of my cheek and also split my bottom lip. When I came to my senses, I felt a pair of gloved hands sliding up my calves to my thighs. I've never been in such a scary situation before, and I was way too shocked to scream. Now, I haven't mentioned it before, but my father insisted a few months prior that I take self-defense lessons, which I did. So I took a deep breath and repeated in my head, "Don't panic," like a mantra. The guy probably thought he'd knocked me out cold since he wasn't paying much attention to my upper body. I thought about my bunch of keys inside of my jacket. I slowly grabbed it inside my pocket and, like I'd learned, fisted my hand with the keys held in between each of my fingers. Then I quickly pulled my fist out and hit the side of the man's face as hard as I could with it. Unfortunately, it wasn't enough to knock him out. The guy had his hood up, covering most of his face, and like I said, it was pretty dark, but I could see that this guy was pretty bulky and obviously stronger than I was. He cursed and pulled a fucking switchblade out of his rear pocket. I really started to panic then. Now, I don't know if it's the adrenaline that made me move fast enough, but I immediately put my arm up to block the blow. However, because I was shaking so badly, I didn't manage to block his arm like I wanted to, and the knife cut through the skin of my arm before flying away. Anger took over fear, and I could honestly feel rage boiling inside of my veins. I tried to kick the guy with my feet, but he had a firm hold on both of my ankles, keeping my legs spread. I was screaming now and struggling as best as I could, trying to scratch the man's face with my nails. Finally, he let go of one of my legs to pin down my wrist. I saw my chance and I took it. I kicked the guy with my free leg, aiming for his kneecap. The guy screamed in pain and fell on his knees. I slid off the hood of the car and punched the guy in the throat. I quickly grabbed my phone, which fell when the guy threw me on top of the car, and ran as fast as I could without looking back towards my friend's mother's car. My friend got out of the car when she saw me and asked what the hell had taken me so long. Obviously, they hadn't heard the screams or seen anything. She stopped yelling when she realized that something was wrong with me. She asked me why I was shaking like a leaf and told me that I looked really pale. And then she grew pale herself when she pointed out the blood running down my arm and my mouth. Her mother got out at that point, and I bent over and threw up against the wheel of the car. They then drove me to the nearest hospital. I didn't say a word during the drive, probably because I was too shocked to say anything. I later reported what happened to the police, but they never found the guy. My photo and the videotapes from the security cameras were useless since we couldn't see the man's face on either of them. I'm now terrified of underground garages, and for some weird reason, I never go out alone without having my set of keys firmly in hand. I still have nightmares about that guy, and what upsets me the most, strangely, is that I'll never be able to put a face on the man that haunts my dreams. A few summers ago, just before the start of my junior year in college, I decided to take a trip to San Francisco. Since I attended my home state's flagship university, I really needed a brief change of scenery. I've always wanted to be in California, which was convenient as one of my friends was interning in San Francisco and offered to let me stay with her. All the details were eventually worked out and I was so excited to go. My friend was still interning while I visited, so she wasn't able to show me around too much, but I had a blast exploring on my own. I spent the majority of my time reading at different parks and taking pictures. She got off work at around 5, so I would head back around then to hang out with her. I always knew I was close to hers when I saw the construction. It was a huge project that required pedestrians to navigate through tunnels. I had been through them many times before, but on that particular day, someone ran up next to me right as we entered the dimly lit passage. He was a larger guy, wearing a white wife beater and blue jeans. I'm usually pretty friendly, but something felt off about him. We awkwardly exchanged heys before I quickened my pace, expecting him to just drift away. But he changed his pace to match mine and kept lingering.
"So, what's your name?"
he asked. "None of your business," I responded without looking at him, hoping he'd get the hint. He didn't.
"Hey, you're really pretty. Do you want to go to a party?"
But before even giving me time to respond, he grabbed my arm. He was pulling me towards the end of the tunnel. I had no idea what awaited me there. His grip was incredibly tight and he was so much bigger than me there was no way I could escape by strength alone. Despite being a very tiny person, I didn't have any pepper spray or any self-defense skills. I had never felt so vulnerable in my entire life. My mind was trying to find a way to survive, but then I felt someone else pull my other arm from behind. I thought it was all over, but I looked back and saw that it was a woman around my mom's age, dressed in business attire. Needless to say, I was very confused.
"Hey, it's really you. I haven't seen you in so long,"
she said as she started sprinting towards the way she came from and pulled me with her. I let out a sigh of relief as I felt his grip loosen. I was ecstatic to exit the tunnel, and when I looked back, he was gone. She told me that she saw the guy go after me and knew that something was wrong. She walked the remaining block with me to my friend's place. I thanked her for everything and we hugged before I hurried to tell my friend what had just happened. We never even got to exchange names, but I don't know what I would have done without her. It warms my heart to know that there are people out there who have the courage to help others. I actually recently moved to San Francisco and the construction at the site of the incident has been completed. Even so, I think of her every time I pass by. Okay, so I'm a member of the slam poetry scene. Basically, it's an excuse to get people to listen to performance poetry by adding a competitive element to things. After running through this small scene in my city and wanting to branch out and push my career further, I started visiting places within driving distance that I could go to. This eventually led me to Charlotte, North Carolina. I started at their local team venue where you would compete to be part of a squad that goes to a national competition every year. I was doing really well and was accepted into the local crew pretty quickly. This led to longer stays and features at some of the other venues in the city. I started going to one that was particularly popular and really good for selling CDs, and that's where I met him. He slowly started flirting with me more and more. Although in my loose days, searching for acceptance and love everywhere, something always kept me leery. I would gladly accept the drinks he sent over, smoke his weed with the group in the stock room between sets, and hang out at parties and events. I always had the tickle in my gut warning me not to get close, but over a year or two we continued to become friends. After a while, he started calling and texting me more often, poking me on Facebook daily, sending messages about wanting to be more than friends and that he wanted to find a, quote, snow bunny. Yes, I'm white and he's black, settle down. Again, I never entertained the idea. There was always something gnawing at me. The crazy in his eyes was too hard to miss. I eventually moved to Denver to take a position teaching poetry and to work at a friend's law firm. The second Christmas I was there, I got the call. A friend from Charlotte, North Carolina relayed the following. He had found his white girl and gotten married. They seemed happy at first, but slowly began fighting more and more. It spilled over into the venue, and often they had to be separated by friends from physically attacking one another in public. One friend, later thinking back, remembers the last time she saw them together. Him pushing his wife, followed by her throwing a drink in his face and scratching his neck deep enough to draw blood. My friend told me that after the couple had been dragged away from each other, she sat with him and smoked a cigarette. She said she laughed and jokingly said that you guys are going to kill each other someday. Around Christmas last year, his wife just stopped coming to the bi-weekly events that they both attended regularly. He explained it casually that they were just on a break. Time goes by, no one really questions why they haven't seen or heard from her in a while, thinking maybe she was breaking from the whole scene in order to put distance between herself and her husband. Her parents, however, hadn't heard from their daughter since Thanksgiving dinner. They would call him and he would say everything was fine and just blow them off. This continues until a week after Christmas, knowing their daughter would never miss a holiday without at least one call. So they call the police and send them to the couple's home for a well-body check. The cops arrive, knock on the door, and they're let in. They ask him where she is, and he replies that she's in the bedroom. He shows them to the room, and there she lay, dead for weeks, rotting in their bed. Oh, and he killed their little dog, too. During this time, he had been attending events, hosting hip-hop nights, even publishing a blog on making a marriage work on one of the local organization's websites. Never once letting on that every night he was going home and sleeping with his murdered wife. The sickest part of all, he has a child from another relationship, a daughter who he gets to celebrate every other holiday with. That Christmas, they opened gifts, had dinner, cuddled up on the couch, and watched movies less than 100 feet from her decaying stepmother. I don't know what would have happened if I'd ever taken him up on his offer to date, but I do know that me and my gut are going to stay on speaking terms, and I will always, always listen. This is a video on 5 real paranormal and ghost-related stories that have been sent in to me by my subscribers. They are in no particular order, and in 2 of the stories I've included proof with pictures or audio. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed the video, and let's begin. My friends, we'll call them Mary and Elizabeth, and I live in a very small town with a lot of back roads, and we take them often to go to the river. There was this old, creepy, abandoned house that was on the way there that we had never even thought of stopping to look at. Well, that was before our Marine friend came home to visit. We'll call him Mike. Mary was always up to go as she was into creepy things and didn't scare easily, but Elizabeth and I were not quite as brave. So when Mike came home, Mary suggested that we all go, and if Elizabeth and I felt unsafe, Mike would be there to make us feel better. We headed off at about noon so that we would have plenty of light to explore by. The door was open when we got there, so it wasn't hard to get in. We were all immediately drawn to a large room that had a desk and some file cabinets inside of it. There wasn't much in the file cabinets, but the desk was full of notebooks and important papers. All the others were looking through drawers and important papers, but I decided to look through the notebooks. I opened the first one I came to and saw that it was a woman's handwriting. The woman who stayed in this room must have used them for journals. What I read in them sent shivers up my spine. They were journals of a grown woman who lived with her parents. She didn't live with them by choice. Her parents were very religious and thought that if she left the house, quote, the evils of the world would corrupt her. I read that she wasn't allowed to have visitors and that her parents brought her food to her room. I can't remember many details because this was years ago, but I remember feeling scared and hopeless. And then we heard something fall upstairs, and so naturally Mike and Mary wanted to go see what it was. The upstairs was full of canned food and clothes, like they had been preparing for something bad to happen. I told them that I was ready to go and that we should come back another time. I know they didn't want to leave yet, but they respected my wishes. Fast forward a few weeks. Mary and I had bought a Ouija board and wanted to try it out. We didn't bother contacting Elizabeth about going with us because we knew she hated Ouija boards, but we did call Mike and made plans to go that night. We packed up the board, some candles, and a camera and made our way out there at about 11 p.m. Mary set up the board on a small table in the room, Mike lit the candles, and I set up the camera on the windowsill. We stood around the board, and before touching it, we went over the rules with Mike to ensure our safety. Then we all put our hands on the planchette. I didn't plan on talking, and I'm not going to lie, I was scared as shit, but I trusted my friends. Mary spoke first, asking if anyone was there. No answer. She asked again. Once again, no answer. Then, Mike laughed and looked at her and said,
"They're probably too chicken."
This really set me off. I was already scared and he wanted to taunt things that could be here. I yelled at him and told him this is exactly why we went over the rules. Don't laugh at it and don't challenge it. Then the planchette moved to no. I looked at Mary and then to Mike. Guys, that's not funny, knock it off. They both denied doing it, and then Mary asked it a question.
Are you a man or a woman?
M-A-N, man.
Did you write those journals?
The planchette moved to no.
Do you know who did?
At that moment, my camera beeped and fell out of the window. It was fully charged when we got there. The planchette moved. M-Y-D-A-U-G-H-T-E-R. My daughter. I felt a burn in my throat and looked at Mary and said shakily, I want to stop. Let's just say goodbye. I'm scared. You guys can do it and I'll just watch. They both told me no because it might scare him away. I was not happy with this answer. I closed my eyes and cried silently while they asked questions. I know, I'm a wuss. I don't remember many of the next questions, but the one that did it for me was when Mike asked if he was good or bad. We waited a few seconds and the planchette started moving slowly. It landed on the moon, which means demon or bad spirit. I yelled at them and told them to say goodbye. They asked a few more questions and then finally said goodbye. We packed up our things and I was the first one out the door. Mary and Mike lingered a little longer and started towards the door. Mary had just stepped out when Mike decided he had one last thing to say. He turned around, laughed and cursed at whatever was there, calling it a pussy and everything else. Then he turned around and started to step out of the door when he fell forward and screamed. I thought he had tripped and went to go help him, but he started running towards us. He told us that he was pushed and that his back hurts. I got behind him and pulled up his shirt to discover that he had 3 red scratch lines down his back. We bolted to his car and heard things banging around in the house. He sped off and we went straight to Mary's house. I didn't sleep much that night and refused to ever go back to that house. The marks on Mike's back healed within a few days and he really had no interest in going back either. I'm glad it was only scratches and not something more serious. I was in the middle of work yesterday when my mom started to blow up my phone, which is weird because she usually never calls me that late. I texted her to see what was up and we had this exchange. There will be a picture on screen right now showing the conversation. At first, I couldn't get the message to play, so I didn't think much of it. My mom has always been into ghost stuff and I'm your average atheist that thinks it's all bullshit. If you're unable to look at the screen, my mom was basically texting me freaking out, telling me my dead grandpa had sent her a voicemail from a number that doesn't exist and she was wondering how something like this could have happened. Then she called me on my brother's phone and played the voicemail through that, and a shiver went down my spine. We talked on the phone and she said the message came from a number that was just all zeros and the phone never rang, she just got the voicemail. After I got off work, I sent the audio my mom texted me, converted it to MP3, and got it to play. What you're about to hear is the voicemail she received, followed by It was the fall of 2007, and I was going into the 10th grade. The girl I had been dating since the summer between 7th and 8th grade had moved away over 2,000 miles from our town, and I wasn't doing well because of it. You know, being an angsty teen who had just lost the love of his life paired with all those super great hormonal imbalances of your high school years. I sort of became withdrawn, spent less time around friends, less time going out, and sort of just turned to the internet for a lot of my social stuff when I was actually feeling it, mostly sticking to just playing games on my computer. It wasn't until the summer of 2008 that I had met a girl on a game I was playing at the time. She claimed to be just a little older than me, lived less than 50 miles away, and while she wasn't a 10 out of 10, she wasn't ugly or even average by any stretch. We had a lot of similar interests and similar family situations. I felt really easy around her. I could talk about things that I wouldn't be able to with any of my friends in real life, and I didn't feel the need for the walls I had put up after me and my ex had split up. All that stereotypical bullshit people express when finding a new best friend or significant other. Her name was Kim, and we hit it off well. Spent tons of time together on our game, and I was even introduced to her friends. Not long after getting close, she wanted me to add her on MySpace. I hardly used it, but figured, what the hell, why not? So I added her, and even a few of the other friends that she had introduced me to. We started talking more on there than in the game. After that, summer ended and school let back in, and Kim eventually asked me on MySpace if I'd be her boyfriend. I was new to the concept of long distance or internet relationships, but I really liked spending time with this girl and wasn't really interested in an in-person deal at the time, so I went for it. Almost immediately, she began to change. Or maybe she was just beginning to show her real self. I don't know. Either way, a week or two after we made our relationship official, she began to send pissy messages to my female friends or family members who she didn't know were related, telling them to back off, keep away from me, that I was hers, etc. I called her out on it, and I got told something along the lines of,
"I just really love you and want them to know you're off limits."
My dumbass teenage brain accepted it and thought that if some guy was getting too close to her that I might do the same. It then stopped for a while and things were fine on that front, but I started getting messages from other girls of various ages and attractiveness, flirting with me out of nowhere. In 1 week, there were maybe 15 different girls, obviously not spam bots, but also totally obvious that they were not different people or who they claimed to be at all. It carried over to the game as well. I asked Kim and her friends if they were pranking me, and they all denied it, saying maybe it was a friend or family member, or even my ex. I just marked all the messages as spam and went about my life. The whole time though, she would treat me like a king. We'd do things on the game together constantly, talk way late into the night, all that stuff you'd expect from a long-distance relationship. Some things fell out of place, but I could put them out of my mind. That was until maybe 2 or 3 months after those messages. Kim started asking me about things that she shouldn't have known about, things I had discussed with other people outside of her group of friends, things that I had talked to family about in private messages on MySpace, even things that I had talked about in real life at school and not online. I didn't think anything of it at first because it started with inconsequential things. Figured maybe she had overheard background conversations during one of our 2 to 4 hour long phone calls. But when it started becoming blatantly obvious that there was no way she'd know details of some private ones, I flipped my shit and asked her what the hell was going on. She, of course, denied everything, said that I had told her or that she had overheard. I didn't believe her and asked her how the fuck she knew about these things when some of them were only said in person to people I knew didn't know her. That was the last night that she spoke to me as Kim. For several months, I was getting texts from different numbers, probably spoofed, emails from throwaway accounts, messages from various fake profiles on MySpace and even on the game. These were messages with personal details that had snippets of discussions I had in private. During that time, I had also noticed messages I had never sent coming from my account, calling women I knew cunts, whores, sluts, horrible things like that. I immediately put one and one together and I realized she had my damn password. I don't know how the fuck she got it, but she had access to my account. Everything I had said on there, plans with people, where we were going to meet for school projects, my address to out-of-state family members so that they could send me packages, all sorts of information that I had kept private. She had access to it all. It still didn't explain how she knew about things I had talked about off the internet though, and I was pissed. After running damage control with friends and family, I decided to try and see how the hell she knew these things I didn't talk about online or on the phone. So I set up with a friend from school to meet up somewhere, telling him in real life that I'd send him a message on MySpace with all the details, and to act as if we hadn't talked about it face to face. We set up to meet at the park after dark that Friday night, with him messaging that his brother and his brother's girlfriend would meet us there with beer and pot, and that we should wait for them in the parking lot. He told me what time to meet him there, and said that he might be a few minutes late since his bike had a flat and that he'd be walking. The actual plan was for him to intentionally be late, and to scope out to see if anyone was following me while I sat there alone playing music on my Zune. Yes, I was one of the few people that had one. Friday night came around and I had made my way to the park around 8 p.m. At about 8:10, I see a car pull up into the other side of the parking lot with its lights off and just sitting there. Based on a small light I saw inside that looked like a phone screen, there was at least a driver and a passenger. I pretended not to notice them, and even thought it could be someone else intending on doing what me and my friend had claimed we would be there to do. But even as 8:30 rolled around, no one got out of the car. At 9 p.m., my friend walks up from the sidewalk that ran on the other side of the parking lot, stopping behind the car for just a moment while pretending to tie his shoes, and then walked up to me, saying loudly that his brother had canceled and that he had been called into work. Only a minute or two later, the car pulled out of the parking lot and sped off. My friend tells me that he had watched them follow me up the street, stop at the corner while I made my way to where I was going to wait, and then followed me in after a few minutes. He had taken down the license plate number and type of car when he pretended to tie his shoe, and he was saying that we should go to the cops. Being dumb, I told him I'd handle it myself. We left, grabbed pizza, and headed back to my place. That night, I changed my passwords and then sent the license plate number to every one of the accounts that had recently messaged me, telling them I knew who they were and to fuck off. In return, I got a message back from one of them telling me what I had wore that night and that they would, quote, see me again soon. After a week of texts telling me various things about me, I finally told my parents, who then called the cops. I gave them all the information that I had and was told that they would contact me if anything came up. While I never heard from Kim again or even the hordes of fake profiles, the cops never called. And when I called them, they would always say that they had nothing to report. I don't know if everything had scared her off or if she just found another target. What creeps me out to this day though, is that my friend had told me when he looked inside the windows, he hadn't seen any younger girls in that car. Just what looked like to be two very ugly looking women at least in their late 30s. I don't know what they intended, if it was just stalking or if they had other things planned. But from that day on, I was a lot more careful with anyone who I met online. For some background information, I was a 16-year-old male high school student at the time of these events taking place. I'm not very outgoing, and due to some social anxiety and frequent mini panic attacks at school, I was fairly bad at making new friends and talking to people. This is all relevant information because the story I'm about to tell you happened precisely because I had such low self-esteem. I had just recently gotten out of a relationship of 2 weeks with my ex-girlfriend. She had broken up with me right after I had returned from my uncle's funeral, and I later learned from friends that she had cheated on me with one of my good friends on the weekend that I went to the funeral. Yeah, thanks for respecting the bro code, dude. I was very insecure due to being cheated on, and I was at an all-time low, thinking that there must have been something wrong with me. Due to being such a socially deprived teen, I always took solace in the internet and the various technology I had at my disposal. Surfing the web was one of my favorite pastimes. One day, while doing my usual obligatory Facebook check, I had noticed I had gotten a new friend request. This came across as very odd to me because I never get new friend requests outside of my circle of friends that I knew from elementary school. The person who had sent the request was a very lovely older girl. She appeared to be around 20, but her profile said she was actually 19. I didn't know this girl at all, and I know some of you will judge me for deciding to add her, but I was going through a very depressive state of mind at the time. Anyways, let's just call her Kate. Kate was always tons of fun to talk to. We would talk about the most nonsensical things and just have a complete ball. She had told me a decent amount about herself, where she lived, what college she was attending, what major she was going for, things like that. Honestly, at the time I was just so psyched that such an attractive older girl had been speaking to me on such casual terms that I sorta just tuned out most of the intricate details. Kate and I had been speaking for roughly a week or two before she asked me if I had Skype. I told her that I did, in fact, have a Skype account, and of course I added her to it. One day, she turned her webcam on, and what I saw absolutely floored me. She was partially naked in her bed, giving me all sorts of alluring gestures, and beforehand had typed out that she also wanted to see me on webcam. I did as requested and got on webcam. This was partially funny because at the time I had considered putting on my scream mask to cover up my face as a joke. In retrospect, I should have gone ahead with that plan at the very least. Once I was on cam, she started typing again, telling me she wanted me to touch myself. I'm very timid when it comes to the subject of masturbation, but since she seemed to take an interest in me, I didn't want to lose her attention. So I did as she asked and I began to touch myself on cam. Not even 10 seconds after I did this, her webcam immediately cut off and faded to a blank black screen, with Skype saying that the call had been disconnected. At first, I didn't really think much of this since my parents had a very shoddy provider and the internet cut out pretty often. But then Kate began to start typing again. The following text is around what she typed. After listing out all my family and friends by name, she then said,
"If you don't send me money for my tuition next semester, I'm going to leak this video to all of your friends and family on your Facebook account."
It took me a few moments for my mind to process what had just happened. This person had put a pre-recorded video of a half-naked woman and lured me into masturbating on camera, just so that they could blackmail me and extort money out of me to pay for their college tuition. By this point, all of my parents' advice for being careful on the internet is flashing through my mind, and I'm slapping my palm furiously against my forehead, wondering how I could have been so foolish. Luckily, in my panic, I was still in a rational enough mind to tell my dad about the scenario, and after grilling me about being disobedient, he marched up to my room and got onto my computer. I don't know what all he and this would-be blackmailer said to one another, but I do know that he pulled out his cell phone and called the authorities on this matter. Afterwards, he had told this person that blackmail was illegal and that he had told the cops about their little scheme. The person immediately logged off and deleted me as a Skype contact. My dad had kept the call and all history of the conversation on my Skype account in case we needed to present it as evidence in an inevitable court case. The unfortunate thing is, the cops could never find out anything about this person. Hell, I don't even know if I really helped matters when I couldn't tell them if the perpetrator was a man or a woman, because, to be honest, I didn't know. All I could tell them was the information that Kate had told me. So the chase pretty much got nowhere. I had deleted and remade my Facebook account in this time frame and never got another contact from Kate ever again. The moral of the story is this: be very careful online. You never know when someone is willing to take advantage of you and use your low self-esteem against you. And this goes for everyone. It's not just girls. After all, I was a victim too. Hello friends, hope you enjoyed the video. Just wanted to give you some information regarding what happened in the second story. What happened in the second story happens very often and should be something you're aware of and careful about. This kind of stuff doesn't just happen to people who frequently show themselves nude on cam. What happened in that story is a very common method of blackmail called e-whoring, or at least some type of e-whoring. E-whoring is basically when you pretend to be a girl online using clips and pictures of somebody else, often cam girls and such. The people pretending to be this person seek out vulnerable or thirsty guys on forums, chat rooms, games, stuff like that. They usually just convince them to send them money in exchange for nude photos of them, but sometimes they have worse intentions, which is where the blackmailing comes in. They'll use your email and other information you've given them in order to find things like your Facebook. They will then often do exactly what happened in the second story. Get you to do something embarrassing on cam and then threaten to send it to everyone you know unless you give them money. Or in other cases, if their target is married or something, they will threaten to send chat logs to their significant other. So guys, please be careful when showing yourself to anyone on the internet. It could be dangerous. And also, I would make sure your webcam is completely covered when you're not using it. There are even some people out there who can gain access to your webcam without you knowing it and turn it on when you're not aware of it. And then, once again, proceed to blackmail you or post pictures of you online. That actually happened to a close female friend of mine. There are, unfortunately, entire communities online dedicated to doing these things to people. Lastly, in most cyberstalking situations, the police will be of little to no help. They don't ever really pursue things like this, and these stories are a good example of that. So the best way to avoid it is to just be aware of it and prevent it from happening. Anyways, that's about it. Once again, hope you enjoyed the video and maybe learned something new. If you did or want to get it out there, please give this video a like. Stay safe and have an awesome day. Follow me on Twitter. Before the video begins, I'd like to let you guys know that this video contains gore-related things. So, if you have a weak stomach, this may not be the video for you. For this video, you all sent me a ton of different kinds of stories, so I tried to mix it up and include a brutal story, some creepy stories, and a weird and unexplained story that maybe some of you can relate to. Joining me for this video, I have a good friend of mine, Lazy Masquerade, who will be narrating a couple of the stories. We also did a video on his channel, so be sure to check that out once you've finished this one. Now, on to the stories. When I was younger, I used to live in the province of Newfoundland in Canada, in a town called St. John's. It isn't a huge city, and people are very welcoming. We're actually known for our hospitality and as being the friendliest people in Canada. I think that's what makes this such a surreal story to retell. My neighborhood mostly consisted of families, so it was pretty quiet most days. There was, however, a group of boys, not malicious, just young, and so they would often get into trouble. Usually for silly childish things like playing Ding Dong Ditch, but occasionally they did cause bigger problems. Not long before this particular day, one thing these boys had done was put duct tape on one of my cats. They had said that they were mimicking a video they had seen online. We needed to cut the tape out of his fur and gave him a lion cut because of it. Needless to say, I was not a fan of those kids. One afternoon in the early summer, I had been outside on my front deck reading when I see two of these boys running up the hill. I lived on the corner, so when they turned onto their street, I could clearly hear them say that there was something dead in the field. They seemed hysterical, so I didn't think it was a prank, and all I could think of was my cats. I was instantly terrified. I used to take in all the stray cats since it snows so much in Newfoundland. I was certain that they had done it, that they had gone too far and murdered one of my cats. I ran towards the soccer field as fast as I possibly could, filled with the dread that one of my animals was dead. When I ran down the gravel path alongside of the field, I could see a couple of the boys still there and obviously upset. They asked if they were going to get in trouble. They said the other boys were going to call the cops. At that moment, I was so sure that they had killed something that I was sick with fear and anger. I asked them where it was, and they told me it was beyond the fence and not in the field itself. Beside the field, there was an underdeveloped area. It ran along the half of the block that wasn't occupied by the soccer field. It was filled with many trees and dense underbrush. All the kids used to play there, and so did I. So I crawled under the gap in the fence and went looking around. I walked through the lot, following along the back of the houses. There was trash strewn about that people had thrown over their fences. However, it didn't take me long to find what I was looking for. The smell hit me long before I actually found anything. It was like being hit in the face with a compost bin. It was rotten and stale, and I'll never forget it for as long as I live. Among some of the other debris, there was a suitcase. It was open and there was something there, something not right inside. There's no real way to describe what I saw. It looked like meat, but it obviously wasn't. It isn't like what you expect from watching TV. It wasn't covered in blood. I think my instincts realized what it was before my mind did. It still had skin. Obviously human skin. I don't really know what happened next. I just ran out of there as fast as I could move. It just didn't seem real. It was wrong. So many levels of wrong. That's not the type of thing that happens in real life. You don't just find things like that outside of TV shows. People don't just find parts of another human being. The boys screaming must have gotten the attention of more than just myself, as there were many adults headed into the field by this point, and the police were not far behind. Many people gawked from the entrance for quite some time. Eventually, I headed back to my house and watched from the patio as the circus unfolded. Some of my neighbors spoke to the police as well as the press. I personally said nothing at all. I couldn't process what I had just seen. It was just this out-of-body experience that was far too surreal to be true. What I saw that day was a piece of a person, a real, dismembered woman who lived at the bottom of my street. It wasn't long before the police identified the victim, and once they did, they arrested her boyfriend. Rumors flew through the neighborhood. They said that she was pregnant, and that's why he did it. Some said they never found all the pieces of her body. More disturbing, and something I have no idea if it's true, but it was said, was that her head was still in his freezer. What I do know is that it took a long time for the people in the neighborhood to recover from that. What had once been this quiet little community was shaken by something so violent, quite literally happening in our own backyard.
When I was 10, my dad and I took a trip to see my grandparents down in North Carolina. I'm from Virginia, so it was a quick 2-day trip. I'd never really been very close to my grandma or grandpa, seeing as they lived in another state. When we got there, my grandpa made an extra effort with me for some reason. He went out and bought me my favorite ice cream, and stayed up late eating it with me while we watched movies and whatnot. It was nice. Weird, but nice. We left and thought nothing of it. That was in the last week of October. December 18th comes around. I'm in my 5th grade class when I get an absolutely horrible stomach pain. I'm crying as my mum's picking me up, It just hurts that bad. That was around 2 in the afternoon. We get home, and I take a nap around 3. I wake up at around 5 PM with some really weird chest pain. It felt like my heart was beating funny. I told my mum, and she said she'd monitor it, but that it should be fine. It eventually went away around dinner time. We go about our night, have dinner and do homework, and my little sister and I get sent to bed. As I'm falling asleep, I hear our house phone ring, which I thought was strange considering it's around 9 PM and on a school night. That's when I hear my dad scream. He's screaming and crying, running up the stairs, and bursts into our room, and my mum jumps up to ask him what happened. They walk out of the room and leave my sister and I wide awake in our beds. After my dad finally calms down, my mum and him bring me downstairs, explaining that my grandpa had died suddenly that evening. He was in great shape for his age and never had any problems with his health. I sit there confused as they continue on telling me what happened. My mum tells me the following. He and Grandma were going to go out for dinner tonight, but Grandpa had a really bad stomachache, so he went to lay down. At around 3 PM, his heart exploded in his sleep, honey. Grandma went to try and wake him up around 7, but he was already gone. That's when it hit me. He had a stomachache and went to sleep at the same time I did. I woke up with my heart feeling funny, right around the time he died. My mum just kind of passed it off as a weird coincidence, but weird things like that happen to me sometimes. When his wife died, I dreamt that she reunited with him in a dream, even before my parents told me. And when my grandma died on my mum's side of the family, I was at school and just burst out crying for absolutely no reason. And when I got home from school, my mum told me she had passed. I haven't lost anyone in a long time, but I swear that stuff with my grandpa seriously made me rethink a lot of stuff I thought I knew as a kid. Weird shit, man.
I'm a female, currently living in New England, but spent much of my childhood in Arizona. I lived in a semi-decent neighborhood in Phoenix that used to be a citrus orchard. The neighborhood itself was okay, but bordered poorer areas that were known for being a bit sketchy. I loved to explore on my Razor scooter, run around with the other kids, go play on the swings, and climb grapefruit trees. I never once felt unsafe, and my parents were comfortable with letting me roam around as long as I came home before 6 PM. I wasn't a timid child and even went into people's yards when something interesting caught my eye. When I ran into the occasional adult outside, probably questioning what a chubby 10-year-old was doing in their yard, I would speak to them just as I would another kid. This led to a few cringeworthy moments, such as me proudly announcing I was harvesting minerals out of a random guy's gravel in his front yard, completely oblivious to the fact that it was his private property. Anyway, one day I was biking around in the afternoon looking for something to do when I spotted a cat in someone's yard. I absolutely adored cats and still do to this day, so of course I brake immediately and just leave my bike in the road to go pet the cat. The cat was friendly and let me pet her, but after a minute walked over to the entrance to the side yard of the house. The gate was open, and I followed her a few feet into the side yard, thinking the owner of the house wasn't home as there was no car in the driveway. The cat walked into a small shed with the door propped open. I peered inside, and to my delight, there were several newborn kittens. I was so ecstatic I could barely contain my excitement at this newfound adorable discovery. Maybe the homeowner would even let me have one. I pet them gently and cooed to the kittens as they crawled around the dusty shed. Eventually, the sun began to set and I was forced to leave my newfound babies behind, but I promised myself I would return the next day. For the next week, I would bike or scooter to the house with the kittens and check on them, bringing a small paper bowl with water for them and the mother cat. One day, I did my usual after-school routine of heading down to the kitten shed. A man in his mid-30s was outside in the backyard sitting in a cheap plastic lawn chair. Surprised, I darted back out of the side yard and back to my scooter in the street. Up until this point, I had never seen the residents of the house, and the thought of anyone living there had honestly slipped my mind. The man followed me out of his yard, giving me a warm smile, not something I expected.
Hi there. You can pet the kittens. I see you here almost every day. You really care about them,
he said happily. The man, who I would come to know as Leo, was really kind and never once gave me any bad vibes. He even gave me Capri Suns when I would come over to play with the kittens. Over the next few weeks, I began to think of him as a friend, and it felt cool to be hanging out with a grown-up. I guess the whole stranger danger thing slipped my mind when faced with a man who would let me pet his cats. Stupid as that sounds. Leo would talk to me as I pet the now energetic and playful kittens. He would tell me about himself, how he took care of his mom and was searching for a job. It didn't occur to me how strange and inappropriate it was for a man in his mid-30s to be talking to a 10-year-old girl whose family he didn't even know. This odd relationship continued until I brought it up to my mother. She surprisingly seemed pleased that I had found something that made me so happy, but told me she wanted to meet Leo before I went over there again. She and I walked over there one evening and Leo welcomed us, friendly as always. It was great to have someone both me and my mom could be friends with since, of course, she wasn't friends with any 10-year-olds. I hoped with all of my heart that she would let me take a kitten home one day. I mentioned this to her a few times and she seemed enthusiastic about the idea. One day, after getting picked up from school, my mom said she needed to talk to me. Thinking I was in trouble, I was a bit nervous. She explained to me that she didn't want me to ever visit Leo again and that it was completely non-negotiable. But what about the kittens? I pleaded. She wouldn't budge. I was sad and angry that I wasn't allowed to visit my friend and see the cats anymore. Thinking about it in retrospect, I am immensely grateful for her ultimatum. Once or twice after this, I rode by Leo's house and didn't see the kittens or even the mother cat outside. And so I became disinterested and eventually forgot about it all. Around a year ago, I was talking with my parents about our old neighborhood and asked my mom if she remembered the house with the kittens. My mom gets a serious look on her face and tells me she could never forget it because of what she witnessed one afternoon. On her day off from work, my mother had gone over to Leo's house to ask if my family could adopt a kitten in the near future. Leo gladly let her in and they started chatting. As they chatted, she noticed something out of the corner of her eye in the hallway on the floor. She casually glanced over during a break in the conversation, and to her disbelief, it was none other than a dead kitten. The thing is, this poor creature wasn't just dead, it had been squashed. Like roadkill, in the middle of this guy's house. My mother, obviously appalled, asked Leo if he knew of this.
Oh, yeah, I hate it when they try to come inside.
He then explained to her that the kitten had been let inside by its mother and that sometimes they snuck in. Every time that this happened, he put on his steel-toed boots and, quote, got rid of them. Looking around, my mother slowly noticed more peculiarities. She got up and left immediately, and that very day forbid me from ever going back to Leo's house. This explained why I never saw the kittens again. I assume now that the mother cat had probably been killed as well or left when her babies were slaughtered. My mother later called the police, who said there was very little that they could do since the cats were technically feral. I'm not sure what would have happened if I had continued to visit Leo, but needless to say, I hope he's never around another innocent animal ever again and that one day he gets what he deserves. Kids, always listen to your parents in these situations. And seriously, never go hanging around a stranger's house or try to be friends with an adult. No matter how nice they seem, you can never truly know what someone is really like behind closed doors.
This story goes back to 2004, back when I was 6 years old. We had recently moved to a town called Puyallup in Washington State. I moved a lot as a child, and it was always hard to make new friends, so moving was always a pain. Although, this time I was excited. The town I was moving to was home to the Puyallup Fair. I had previously been to that fair, but it was always a rare occurrence, as it was very far from where I lived before. Anyways, enough about the backstory. My family and I were at the fair, and were partaking in the usual fair activities. Deep-fried food, people watching, and riding the rickety roller coasters. I was standing in line for a roller coaster, occasionally looking at my parents standing by. I vaguely remember a man standing closer to the ride than most parents, holding a camera. Me, being as young as I was, I just kind of figured it was some guy capturing pictures of his children. I didn't really notice anything was wrong, until some guy started yelling at the man with the camera. I just remember the guy grabbing the camera from the man and looking through a few of the photos before getting louder and visibly more angry. I didn't understand what was wrong, but before I knew it, the guy pocketed the man's camera and threw a fist his way. The man tried to fight back, but the guy just threw him on the ground and started to slam the man's head into the pavement, making a bloody mess. The ride attendant kept the line moving, and had another ride attendant keep the kids exiting the ride in a safe area, away from the brawl. I remember looking down from the ride, seeing security run up in their bright yellow vests, and a few police officers taking the man away. Not too long ago, I asked my mother about that event. It turns out that that man was taking pictures of children. Not his own, just random kids at the fair. Luckily, that guy caught on to what he was doing and quickly shut it down. My mother ended up talking to that guy before he confronted the man. She said that they were all kind of watching him creep around and take pictures of the kids. I don't think it was until the man paused his photo taking to scroll through his collection that the guy saw many pictures of children, even some naked children. I'm pretty sure that was that guy's snapping point. I know that I don't have too much strong information, or that good a memory of this, but really, it's just the thought of it that gives me the creeps. I know we all hear about stories of pedophiles, see it on the news, and are constantly warned about it. But it's one totally different thing to see it firsthand. Just thinking I could have been one of the kids in his collection. We're all just lucky someone caught on. You can really never be too observant.
Hey everyone, hope you enjoyed the video. I definitely got a lot of odd submissions for this one. I wasn't really able to do the paranormal type of childhood stories that were sent in to me, but I'm thinking of possibly doing a video like that in the future. I'm pretty sure that my next video is going to be a cyberstalker video or something relating to that sort of stuff. So if you have a story like that, or really any story at all, please be sure to send it in to corpsehusbandstories@gmail.com. with the subject of the email being what kind of story it is. Also, be sure to head over to Lazy Masquerade's channel and check out the video that we did there. Links will be in the description, and there should also be an annotation on screen right now. One last thing that I'd like to mention very quickly. I'm in the process of trying to move out right now. Those of you who follow me closely know that my living situation that I'm in currently makes it extremely difficult to make videos. This, coupled with the fact that all my health problems and even new ones have recently flared up again, is making my uploads a lot slower, and I do apologize for that.
I'm hoping that moving out makes things a lot easier in terms of making videos and hopefully also eases some of my health problems. But it's also a big risk for me. So, if there was any time to share my videos or leave some of my playlists on, now would be the time. Well, that's about it, and once again, I hope you enjoyed the video and thank you so much for all your support. Make sure to follow me on Twitter and other social media for updates and just shenanigans in general, to be honest. We have a lot of fun there. Stay safe and have an awesome day. To preface this, I want to say that last year I spent about 32 days in the woods either scouting, hunting, or fishing. The year before that, I spent about 22 days. This doesn't include my regular hunts and camping adventures, which in the past 3 years adds up to just over 100 days. I've been hunting since I was 9 and have spent a lot of time outdoors in various different parts of the US and in Canada. I've seen and heard a lot of strange shit, but this takes the cake. I was in Cohutta in the North Georgia wilderness for 7 days scouting for bears, wild hogs, and deer, prepping for a hunting trip later that year. I had hiked in about 10 miles and then went off the trail for another 3 or 5 miles. Basically, I was out in the middle of nowhere. Since I was alone, I was using a hammock that has a built-in bug net, and I had a rainfly over it. I spent about 3 days halfway up a mountain just looking for a good place to hunt. I saw 3 or 4 good-sized bears, about 10 hogs, and came across some good-sized deer. On the 4th day, I was going to head down to a small stream that I had marked on my GPS and then set up camp, restock on water, and prep for the 2-day hike back. I could have gone faster, but I wanted to be able to look for any animal sign along the way. As I was approaching this small stream, I noticed a tent, which I was really excited to see, as I had been completely alone for a few days, and it's always nice to run into another hiker because generally us wilderness folks are pretty down to earth. As I got closer to the tent, I noticed that there was a small pack on the ground just outside of it. I figured the person couldn't have been far from where the camp was, so I set up my camp about 30 yards away, and with about 4 hours of daylight left, started cooking some dinner. 2 hours later, I was starting to wonder where this person was. Given that I was in the wilderness and it was a 1+ day hike out, there wasn't much that I could do. But I did hike around the site, making a circle as I went out to look for any signs of struggle in case of a bear attack or maybe they had an injury. I got about a 1/4 of a mile from the campsite, walking a circle, but I didn't find anything. Eventually night came around and no one showed. I started a fire in hopes that the person would be able to find where they set up and have some light. Fires burn really bright and are very easy to see from far away. After eating, searching, and hoping that the person was going to make it back, I called it a night. I had a small flask with me and took a couple sips of whiskey, jumped into my hammock with my pistol, and attempted to go to sleep. I sleep pretty hard, I mean really hard, regardless of where I am. It literally annoys my friends because I can always seem to fall asleep and stay asleep regardless of where in the world we are. But this night was different. I felt like something was off, but I figured it was just me worrying about this person who, by all my accounts, was completely missing. So, for the first time in my life, I woke up to the sound of what I thought was footsteps, but not in the sense of footsteps on leaves, but what a heavy-footed person would make on an old wood floor. It was extremely loud. I got my gun, grabbed my headlamp stored in a small compartment up above me, and waited to see if it would stop. Right at that moment, it did. And that's when I saw something that scared the absolute shit out of me. On my rainfly, the gleam of a flashlight, faint but there. I shouted, "Hello?" And right when I did, it sounded like 10 people suddenly running away from me in every direction. I dropped out of my hammock onto the ground, frantically turning on my headlamp and shining it all around me. But I didn't see anything. My heart was racing pretty bad, but I thought it might have just been the reflection of the moon on the rainfly. Yeah, that was it, and those footsteps running away from me was probably just armadillos or something, even though their eyes shine and they're pretty easy to spot. Problem was, there was no moon. I'd never seen an armadillo above 2,000 feet, not to say that they don't live up there, just I've never seen one.
and for some reason, the campsite I set up by was gone. The fire had been put out by water. It was apparent because there was not a damn coal in the thing. I thought for sure it was about 4 a.m., but I had only been asleep for about an hour. At this point, I wanted to leave, but hiking out in the wilderness while it's dark is always a bad idea. So I grabbed my flask, took a swig of whiskey, removed my rainfly so I could see out of my hammock and around the area I was in, and tried my hardest to go back to sleep. I'm laying down when I saw some light hit the trees above me, and it was clear it was coming from downstream. I got out of my hammock and started yelling, "Hey, do y'all need any help?" No response. I saw whatever was putting out the light, and it spun around and started heading down the stream really fast. At this point, my body had pumped more adrenaline than it had blood, and I was exhausted from it all. I finally was able to fall asleep and woke up around 7 a.m. When I did, I noticed that my water filter I had left out was missing. It's a gravity filter and it hangs on a tree filtering water down into my main bladder that I put in my backpack. And my water bladder, which was sitting at the base of a tree, looked like it had been cut down the middle with a knife. They cut down my bear bag, which had food in it, and took some of it. The creepiest part of it all was that they went through my bag, which was under my hammock, while I was sleeping. I checked my bear bag before I went back to sleep the second time, and it was still there, hanging, and my bag under my hammock hadn't been touched. I packed all my shit and hightailed it out of there, keeping my pistol close to me and moving as fast as I could. I ended up making the hike back in just under 15 hours. I hiked the trail part in the night because I wasn't about to spend another night out there. I didn't see anyone on my hike out. There were no cars parked at the trailhead, and the DNR said that they had only seen my car there. Since then, I haven't gone out there without any friends. I reported all of this to the local DNR, but they looked at me like I was crazy. Maybe I am. I hike very frequently and was on a trail and about 8 miles from the nearest gravel road. It was just me and my dog. Just to note, I've hiked these trails frequently and have only seen other people during mushroom hunting season and only near where the parking patches are, and this was in January. So it was freezing cold and there were no mushrooms. I'd been going at it for almost 2 hours when I stumbled upon a pile of bones. Large bones, bigger than human, maybe a cow, maybe buffalo, maybe horse. They were completely clean and sun-bleached. No flesh, no fur. I find deer remains all the time. They always have fur on their legs. This means someone or something cleaned them, or their old bones. The scary part is that they were neatly arranged into a pyramid shape, all leaning on each other like a teepee. I was just on this trail the week before and there had been no bones. There had also not been a giant dead animal, and there wouldn't have been any rotting happening because it was 20 Fahrenheit. I stared at them for a while, then turned around and spotted more peculiarities. The tree behind me had several bones strung up and hung in the tree by the trail marks. They swayed in the wind and kinda clunked gently like morbid wind chimes. So this means it had to have been somebody and not some weird raccoons or something. I start to panic because does this mean that somebody's watching me? Am I being warned or stalked? I always go on a select few trails and this is one of my most frequented, and never have I seen someone else out this far. The hairs on my neck stand up because I'm sure I'm in the crosshairs of some serial killer who's been stalking me. I walk with my headphones in. He could have followed me for weeks and I wouldn't have known. My dog freezes and points towards a different large tree 10 yards away. The hair of her scruff raises and she starts to growl and creep toward the tree. I'm panicking. I have nothing other than my hiking stick. My dog barks once. She's 40 pounds, by the way. She's not an attack dog. And she starts sprinting towards the tree. I instinctively crouch down. She reaches the tree and a turkey takes off from the other side, gobbling as it flies away. I can still feel my pulse in my eyes as I watch it fly away. I sigh, pet my dog, and check to make sure I didn't shit myself. I snap a few pictures of the weird bones and make my way back. I still hike through there, and the bones are still there untouched. No way am I touching them. No idea where they came from. Probably some weird old coot trying to scare people. It definitely worked on me. Tennessee has some real bumfucky people out in nature. I hiked all around while in school there, made some good memories with a girl in the enveloping nature. Tennessee has good roads to popular hiking sites and tons of mini trails branching off. Sometimes you need to know what to look for as far as trail markers go, because the interesting ones are always a good ways out. There's one spring waterfall that spills across a mossy granite wall towering over a shallow stream that empties into a decent-sized pond. I went out there with a friend last time and we got separated on the way out. I have no fucking clue how this happened. We've each been hiking for over 10 years. I've gone over it 1,000 times in my mind, and it has to be this one ledge system. To get to the top of the fall, you need to take a longish detour that has a lot of old wooden railing and a 3-way branching ledge system. Okay, so I've taken all 3 routes and ended up at the same spot. They take maybe 3 or 4 minutes to blast through, and they're kind of like rocky corridors. I don't take the left one anymore because I'm 90% sure these big stains in the middle are blood. Don't want to know what happened there. It's really odd because the left path is by far the most inviting. Flowers bloom from the vines that are etched into the moss-matted bedrock. Anyways, I'm 45 seconds ahead of the girl I mentioned earlier, and I opt for the right path when I realize that I should tell her to avoid the left path. It's really hard to reverse given the sloping angle of the path and a few short drops that become narrow climbs. Fuck it, it's faster if I speed through and then yell down to her. I get out of the right corridor, swing around to where the middle path drops off, and I yell. No reply. She took left. Fuck. I run over and climb into the left corridor, thinking maybe she saw the stains and freaked out. It looks like someone got bludgeoned to death, to be fair. She's fucking gone. Ashley? Nothing. And that's what made my hair stand up. I literally heard nothing. No birds, no hum of the forest, not even wind. Just myself in the babbling water. I traced left all the way back and noted a few side passages if you miss a couple of the jumps. No bodies were in there or the middle. Good. I figure I may as well get to the top of the falls where I can get somewhat of an aerial view. I get there and Ashley is sitting there waiting for me. She says she took the left path with the trail guide. What? There are no trail guides. There are rangers, but she knows the difference. They wouldn't be in the rock labyrinth. This guy had a uniform on and a trail authority visor on. She knew what I was thinking based on my face and agreed that we should reverse course ASAP without us saying anything out loud. Man, it's a weird feeling when you know you're being watched. So we pretend like we're going back to the car real quick to get some more water, and so I left some fish food in a little crevice like I always did, and we left. She showed me this weird side passage that could not have existed a year ago. I walked all the way around. You had to crouch, but you could walk through the labyrinth if you kept left through. In hindsight, we should have taken another way. I think that he lives in those tunnels. She said that he kept trying to lead her in different directions, but she just followed the light and saw him standing in the tunnel as she walked the rest of the trip to the top. That means that he was there when I was looking for her. That means that she followed him before seeing the blood splatters all over the floor and walls. And that's not even the totally fucked part. The fucking fish food was on the hood of my car. Her water bottle was gone too. She had it carabinered to her pack, so he must have snuck up and taken it at some point. We hiked fast too. We never went back, and I don't think we ever will. My boyfriend and I share an apartment in London with our dog, which is a husky.
My boyfriend is in the film and television industry and used to work from home most of the time, so he would generally look after the dog during the day while I was at work. Take him for walks, keep him company, stuff like that. However, recently my boyfriend was given a new job opportunity in the center of London, much higher pay and much more related to what he actually wanted to be doing. But obviously this meant that he would be out of the house more often, so we had to change our schedule for walking the dog and stuff like that. We decided on alternating days since this seemed fair. So 2 or 3 mornings a week, I would now get up early before I had to be ready for work and I would walk the dog. Now, I'm really slow when it comes to getting ready in the morning, so I had to get up super early on my days to walk him, usually around 5 or 5:30 a.m. I would walk around for 15 minutes to the park near our apartment and let him off the leash in a large field-type area that was enclosed by tall hedges on all sides so that he could run around. This one particular morning, back in November of 2015, something happened that scared me more than anything I can think of. With it being close to winter, it was still very much dark out when I left at that hour of the morning. It was cold and had been raining quite heavily during the night, so everything was wet and still stank of damp. I was groggy, as usual, and not wanting to be there at all. The park creeped me out at the best of times. It was dark and always deserted at this time. There were streetlights, but they're sparse and that old kind that gives off that dull yellow light that just makes everything look even creepier. The enclosed area where I let my dog off is behind them. It also isn't the nicest area. The park itself is nice, but you do get the occasional drunk passing through. They wander through the park to find somewhere quiet to drink more or just go to sleep. Thinking about it, I probably should have never gone there alone in the dark, but the dog needed a walk and there wasn't anywhere else close by. Plus, I figured that it was morning, not late at night, so who's going to be out mugging people at that time in the morning? Anyway, back to the story. I had let the dog off and he had run to the far end of the field to go sniff around and do dog stuff, I guess. I stayed as much as I could at the better lit end of the field, but after a few minutes I decided to follow him to make sure that he wasn't eating stuff off the ground or something like that. He's mostly white, so I could still make out the vague shape of him moving around in the darkness. As I approached the darker end of the field, that's when I heard it. It sounded like somebody coughing or retching, like they were throwing up violently. I turned around quickly and scanned the field. No one was in the enclosed area itself, but just over the hedges at the far end, I spotted the silhouette of a man's head and shoulders, illuminated in the light from the street lamp. He was standing on the side of the field with the garages, one hand up against the wall, head down and obviously being sick. I could tell it was a guy from the sounds he was making. I figured he was just drunk, probably didn't even know I was there, and just carried on with what I was doing. Still, I was a little uncomfortable with him being there and hoped he would just leave soon. Man, was I wrong. A minute or so passed and I began to hear him mumbling to himself indistinctly. I chanced another look over at him, and this is when I began to get kind of freaked out. I had to quietly move a little closer towards him in order to verify I was actually seeing what I thought I was seeing. He had vomited down the wall and onto the floor and was now proceeding to scoop up what he could of the vomit with his bare hands and wipe it all over his body, his face, and his hair. He did this all while mumbling to himself and chuckling occasionally. This guy was clearly not all there. I decided that it was time to go. I turned my back on the man and called for my dog to come to me. This was a big mistake. I began walking towards my dog, all while calling him and looking back to keep an eye on the crazy man. I stopped in my tracks when I realized that he had now turned to face me. He was reasonably far away and I could only see his head and part of his torso over the hedge. But the street lamp made it clear that he was definitely facing me. He knew that I was there. I froze momentarily, paralyzed with a sudden panic in the pit of my stomach, and then snapped myself out of it. I grabbed my dog, who had wandered over to me and was sniffing around my feet, and put him back on the leash and made a beeline for the gate. I looked back over to the other side and was relieved for a moment because I could no longer see the man. My relief was short-lived though, when I realized that he had not gone away, but had just moved out of the light a little and was now crouched down slightly behind the hedge. I could still hear him mumbling though, and I'm fairly certain he was still watching me. I was almost at the gate when I began hearing him rustling through the bushes. So let me try and paint a picture of where he was in relation to me. Imagine a square. The gate is in the top left corner and he was in the hedges at the top right corner. I reached the gate and began fumbling with the sliding locks. Suddenly, the rustling stops and with dread in my heart, I look over to see why. I really wish I hadn't done that. I wish I had just opened the gate and walked quickly in the opposite direction. He was now standing in the field with me. I couldn't see his face as he was in near complete darkness, but I could see his body outlined in the light from the street lamp. He looked tall and thin. He was breathing heavily and still mumbling to himself. Once again, I was momentarily unable to move out of fear, but only for a second. I bolted, and to my horror, so did the man. This creep set off at a terrifying speed towards me. I slammed the lock on the gate open and dragged myself and the dog through, throwing it shut with a crash after me. Seconds later, I heard it open again and could hear loud footsteps behind me. I ran, faster than I ever have before. I didn't look back, not once. I didn't dare. Sprinting like I was, you can reach the main road at the park entrance in less than 5 minutes. Only then, on the well-lit street with cars and people on their way to work, did I pause to look behind me. He was gone. I was so relieved, I immediately burst into tears, panting and sobbing like a maniac. I sat down at the bus stop to compose myself for a moment, and then hurried home to tell my boyfriend what had just happened. Seeing how scared I was, he suggested calling the police, but nothing had actually happened. Whether the guy was just trying to scare me or had worse intentions, I don't know. But one thing's for sure. I'm never going back to that park when it's dark again. So, I live in South Florida between Miami and Fort Lauderdale, and it is hot as all fuck here, the real field temperature hitting 110 and 115 regularly. So, I do most of my walks in Pokemon Go playing at night, typically between midnight and 4 AM. Even though my area is getting pretty ghetto, I don't really have that many issues. My family has a reputation and I'm a large, tall, intimidating looking male. I also go out armed and I know what streets and places to avoid, so I'm usually perfectly fine out there on my own. My normal route has me going down a well-lit, typically populated street with 2 shopping plazas with 24-hour businesses inside of them. I hit 2 Pokestops there, go back down my street 3 blocks to another Pokestop and gym by a park and a police substation, then in front of a school, down to a very dark parking lot in front of another park with another Pokestop and gym. The last of those has a community center at it with large glass doors where some light shines out onto the sidewalk in front of it. And there are some parking lot lights when they're actually working, which isn't often. The sidewalk in front of this building has hedges that block it from view from the parking lot, which up until this week when they were trimmed down to waist level were maybe about 5.5 feet tall. I was sitting out on one of those concrete parking meters capturing the gym to get my defender bonus and decided to drop a lure since I'd be there for inventory and leveling my newly captured gym. About 10 minutes into my lure, I noticed something moving near the hedges in the light from the doors. I thought maybe it was a cat or an owl, as we have a lot of those in this area, so I ignored it at first. Until about 15 minutes into my lure, I got up to stretch my legs. I did some minor stretching and as I was sitting down I realized the shape in the light was there again. Keep in mind, the light is coming from behind and the parking lot lights blow ass even when they are working, so this figure was mostly shadowed. All I could make out was the top half of a human torso and head peeking out around the side of the bushes, just fucking staring at me. I just stared back and after what seemed like an hour, but was probably only a minute, the form vanishes behind the bushes. I'm sketched as fuck by this point, so I pull my knife from my belt, open it, and put away my phone. Standing up, I call out, "Who the fuck's out there?" All I get in return is a fucking giggle, not like a little kid's giggling, a fucking adult woman's giggling. So I call out to her again. "Quit fucking around, you're gonna end up getting shot doing that shit." She just laughs more and sticks her head out from behind the bushes from a bit further down. Keep in mind, as I've said, the area isn't the greatest. We have hookers, druggies, homeless people, and even combinations of the three wandering around here at all hours of the night. I'm figuring this is probably some drug-addicted chick high as fuck and decide I don't want to stick around. So I start backing out slowly, watching the bushes. Her fucking head peeks out from the bushes in the original spot, and then her fucking body. She starts following me slightly faster than I'm backing out, just giggling and shambling out at me. I back out to a better lit area and yell out for her to fuck off, and she just stops and stands there laughing and pointing. By this point, I decide that if she follows me and makes a move, I'm getting stabby. Otherwise, I just want to get home. I turn and walk fast back in front of the school area that I mentioned previously, and started heading towards the other Pokestop by the police substation, figuring I'd stop at the substation and if there was an officer out there, just give them the heads up that there's some crazy chick by the park and community center. Then go down some random streets to get home, making sure I wasn't letting anyone follow me. Turns out, she had followed me, very slowly. When I checked behind me at the Pokestop on the corner, I saw her looking out from behind a tree. I booked my ass to the substation and spoke to the cop on duty, then followed through with the rest of my plan. I haven't seen that creepy lady ever again, even though I head out there every night. I'm assuming she was a druggie or a homeless crazy person and that the police chased her off on my tip. When I was 14, I would spend the summer holidays away from school at home. In the small village I lived in, this meant I mainly spent my days on my own while my parents worked, either watching TV or playing The Sims for the most part. My parents were generally out of the house from 8 a.m. until 5 p.m. I was raised to never answer the door to strangers. However, where I liked to sit in the living room, my chair was next to the window anyway, so I could always see people on the street and they could always see me too, I guess. One day, I was sitting down watching daytime TV when I noticed a man walking down our street. As our street is a dead end, I normally recognize everyone who walks down it, but I had certainly never seen him before. He was tall, thin, and unshaven. He was wearing a hooded jumper with the hood up and sleeves rolled up, revealing tattoos on his arms. He was carrying a large duffel bag and looking closely at each house as he passed. As I sat watching him, I was clearly in full view of him too. He started to pass our house, and when he saw me, he smiled and turned to come up our driveway. He came up to our front door and knocked. I knew I shouldn't answer the door to someone I didn't know, but he had seen me, and at 14 I was afraid of being rude to an adult. So I obediently went and opened the door, just a crack. I peeked around the door and said hello. As he spoke, he pulled the duffel bag around to the front of his body and asked me if my parents were home. At this point, I thought he would probably leave if I said no, but instead he stepped towards the door and unzipped the bag.
Well, the thing is, I've just got out of prison. I want to do the right thing, you know. It's so hard to find a job, so I'm trying to sell some things.
He started pulling towels, handkerchiefs, and other junk out of the bag. The word prison made my heart skip, and I quickly mumbled something about having no money and closed the door. He stood there on the step for a minute, still talking to me about being able to help. So I went upstairs and waited for him to leave, which he did eventually. I soon settled back down to watching the TV and forgot all about the encounter. At 5 p.m. my parents came home and they took the TV, so I went up to my room. A little while later there was a knock at the door. I came onto the landing and peered down as my mom answered the door. She opened the door to 2 police officers. They asked if anyone had came to our house that day. My mom said that no one had, and that was when I remembered my visitor from earlier. I came down the stairs and said that someone actually had been at the front door earlier. Seeing I was young, the 2 police officers asked to come inside and talk to me. They asked me to describe the man and the conversation that I had with him. They seemed really worried and kept telling me not to worry and to be honest about what happened. Once I had told them what had happened, they asked to speak to my parents on their own, and then they thanked me and they left. I went straight to my parents asking them what was going on. My mom explained that shortly after the guy had come to our house, he had gone to another girl's house. She was in the shower and hadn't answered the door when he knocked. Apparently, he let himself into the house and walked upstairs when he found her in the shower and sexually assaulted her. With my description and the evidence from the girl, they tracked the guy down. It turned out he had just been released from prison for a similar attack on another girl. I never answer the door when I'm alone now, and I also won't shower when I'm home alone. Alright, so I'm a huge fan of Pokemon, and like every other fan, when Go came out, I immediately got the game the second it was released. Now, I live in the middle of nowhere, and the closest town is about a 15-minute drive away, so I never explored that area alone. And when I did go, there was normally someone else who knew their way around with me, so I could just blindly follow them and not get lost. So, in other words, I don't particularly know the towns near where I live very well. Since there was absolutely no Pokemon anywhere near my house, I decided to go to the closest town and go on my first Pokemon adventure. So I'm walking around catching a bunch of Zubat when I take a look at the Pokemon tracker. And awesome, there was a Pidgeotto nearby. I followed towards where it was, and it took me to an alleyway with a garage that someone painted, "You piece of shit, stay the fuck out, I know who you are," across it. I always take pictures of interesting things like that, so I just snapped one real quick and went on my merry way. Now, that was weird, but I didn't think much of it. I just figured the people who lived there were having a problem with a thief or a squatter, and it was broad daylight, so what's the worst that can happen, right? So, a few steps later, my phone vibrates and I found the Pidgeotto. As I hold the phone up to catch it, I hear a rapid crunching on the gravel behind me. I turn to look, and this fat old scruffy man who looked like a straight hill jack is running at me. He screams, "Now I told you to stay the fuck away!" And I could see something metal in his hand. I forget the Pidgeotto and run for my life. I ran straight for Joby's, which is a store that is a hybrid of a pawn shop, a yard sale, and a junkyard. There are always these big, intimidating, but friendly hillbillies that hang around and work there. So I figured I might as well fight fire with fire. By the time I get there, the hillbillies can tell just by looking at me that something was up. "What's wrong?" the oldest of them asked me. I think he's the manager, but I'm not entirely sure. I explained what happened, leaving out the fact that I was playing Pokemon Go because, you know, technology is evil and Thomas Edison was a witch. "Don't you worry, you can hide out here and we'll make sure no crazies come and get you," he told me. I stayed and looked around at the piles of junk for sale. There was no sign of the guy. So, to repay them for their help, I ended up buying a dog crate from them for about $20. Now, after that ordeal, I go across the street to start heading back to my car. I look at my phone to see what time it is, and lo and behold, the Pidgeotto was still there, locked in battle with me. I took a picture of it, with Joby's off in the background. You can even see all the shit they have for sale off to the right of the Pidgeotto. After all that, I threw a Pokeball at it and the game froze on me and crashed due to the servers being down. I say fuck it and give up and go home. Hours later, when the server was finally back up, I saw that not only did the game register that I caught the Pidgeotto, it also glitched and said that I didn't use any Pokeballs when I did. So, at least in the end, something good came out of all this mess. I go on a jog every night, like many others, just to keep my mental and physical health at a good level and to wind down after work at around 9 p.m. Anyways, a few days ago I was taking my usual route, and now that Pokemon Go is out, there were quite a few people of all ages out and about near the parks, parking lots, golf courses, etc. Very populated and well-lit places. It was nice seeing others outside for a change, especially at night. I'm a 16-year-old girl, so not much more to explain about that. Again, there were people of all ages, including children as young as 5 or 6 from around the neighborhood roaming around. There was also a pretty shady car that was driving around the area. I don't call it shady because of the type of the car, color of it, or anything that would indicate that it was a pedo car because there was really nothing that stood out about it. However, they would drive very slowly when they came around. I scratched the worst case scenarios out of my head because nothing really has ever came from me worrying. I figured it was just someone being cautious because they knew kids might not notice the cars coming in the road, or maybe it was a parent making sure their kid was getting along or something like that. I shrugged it off and forgot about it. About halfway through where I walk, all of the parks and stuff cut off to where it's basically just houses and churches. As I was walking by one of the churches, I noticed a group of young kids, like very young, we're talking the ages of 5 to 7 here, that must have lived in some of the houses nearby, gathered up in the parking lot of this church. I figured it would be smart to keep an eye out for them, plus I was pretty tired from jogging and just really wanted to sit down. I kept an eye on them for about 15 minutes. Then that car I mentioned earlier rolled through even slower than before. Now I was beginning to get suspicious. They began driving up and down the street for a while before pulling into the church parking lot. I began to walk towards the church with 911 ready to be dialed, and pepper spray in my hand, just in case it was a situation in which I needed to intervene. I really didn't know what I, a 115-pound girl, could do, but I figured something was better than nothing if something were to happen. The person in the car rolled down their window and was talking to the kids. They looked as if they were thinking about agreeing on something, turning to each other and exchanging thoughts. I walked towards the car, asking if something was wrong, making sure to keep my distance from the windows of the car in case he decided to grab me. He turned to me and interrupted what they were about to say.
I was just picking them up to go search in a different location. No big deal.
His tone was that of someone who you interrupted during an important meeting or call. That "this is none of your business, get out" tone. I stepped backward and asked them if they knew the man. A little girl in their group looked up and said, "No, we just met him, but he's going to help us find something." I felt the color drain from my face as I realized that my fear for these children was absolutely real. I calmly turned to the man so I didn't scare the children, turning the screen of my phone to where he could see that I dialed 911. He put his car into gear and sped out of the parking lot. I managed to catch the plate number as he drove off, thankfully. I called the parents of the only child who had his parents' number, and thank God they picked up. I explained the situation, and they came with the other parents to get their children. The police looked into it, and apparently the church is the site of a Pokestop, one of the few in the area. The man told the kids he would drive them to where a gym site was and was trying to convince them to get into the car. I really hope that parents make sure to watch out for their kids while they're playing this game. They don't need to be helicopter moms per se if their kids are older, but should at least talk to their kids about the few sick people out there in the world. The game is a beautiful concept, don't get me wrong, but people definitely should keep an eye out on their kids, especially if they're like the ones in the parking lot. To start off, I'm 16 and female, and I just got home after being followed. As I'm sure everyone knows, Pokemon Go has taken the attention of everyone after its release. I myself enjoyed the playing experience of the handheld games much more, but my siblings wanted me to play and I was extremely bored, so I took my brother's bike for a ride. Now, my brother is much taller than me, so when I sit down on the bike, my feet just barely touch the ground, and the seat digs into my crotch, making it extremely uncomfortable to sit on the bike when stopped. This will be important later on in this story. So I locked up the house, keeping the key on a lanyard around my neck, setting off towards my friend's neighborhood as it was an easy 5-minute ride. I was having at least a little bit of fun, stopping every few yards when my phone chimed that a Pokemon was nearby. When I started to make my way past my friend's house, ready to loop back towards mine, a tall man in a hoodie carrying a plastic shopping bag waved my way. I didn't think much of it. Trying to be polite, I waved back. He tried to ask me about my day, but I never stopped my bike to talk to him. So by the time he asked, I was already way too far ahead to say much besides "I'm good, thank you." I rode up my friend's street and actually passed some other kid who was playing Pokemon Go on his bike, and we gave each other an approving nod and laughed as we passed each other. I'm about to pass the busy main street to my neighborhood when I spot him. The same tall, skinny man in the black hoodie. He ran up to meet me and stood in front of my bike, not letting me pass.
Hey, girl. What, are you doing donuts around the block?
He was trying to make small talk. I tried my best to smile. No, just out for a short bike ride in this nice weather. At this point, I put my hand on my pocket as he was making his way to stand at my side, which had my phone.
Hey, do you mind sharing that water? I just came back from the community center after pumping some iron.
He lifted his scrawny arms up and down, leaving the plastic bag on the ground. I looked at its contents. A gallon of milk, some beer bottles, and something wrapped in a paper bag. I got a bit nervous at this point and wanted to leave as I was quite uncomfortable from standing on top of my bike for this long. But I refused to get off and give this guy a chance at whatever he wanted. Oh, that's cool. I pretended not to hear his question as I didn't want to anger him by denying his request.
That's a nice bike you got. Maybe we should ride around together. You know, my house isn't too far. I live in the apartments up the hill.
Nah, man, this isn't even my bike. I'm borrowing it. I have to give it back soon, and I can't ride it again for a long time. Not complete bullshit. It was my brother's bike.
What do you mean, nah?
He looked irritated at this point and was reaching for something in his pocket. I felt trapped at this point. He was on my left and to my right was a busy street with cars flying by. But it's not like any of them could see me as the trees at the corner we were on covered us from their view. And I was utterly uncomfortable with the bike seat digging into me. I was about to make another bullshit reason why I couldn't go with him when my phone chimed, signaling to me that a Pokemon was near. At this point, I used this to my advantage. I picked up my phone and pretended to read a text. Oh, man, my sister wants me back. It seems my dad's home. Then I started to ride off in the same direction that I came from. He said something as I left, but I didn't quite catch it. I pedaled fast as hell to my friend's house, flying down her street and skidding into her driveway. I threw my bike into her backyard and hid on her back porch. I was hoping she'd be home, but I didn't see anyone inside. I didn't want to try going back towards my house if that guy was still there, but I couldn't wait long. Outside it was getting way too hot and I'm not used to being out of the house. I have some pretty bad depression which leaves me to sleep all day. Just my luck that the one day I decide to go outside, some fucking creeper finds me. I called up my other friend who lived about 3 minutes away and no answer. I texted another who lived about 5 minutes away. She wasn't home, but her sister was. She has to be. She always is. Her house was pretty close to mine, on the same street that guy was on, but I had to take that chance. I waited about 2 minutes before I flew to her house. Again, throwing my bike into their backyard before pounding on the door to get in. The gods must hate me because there was no answer. I looked up the street and saw the guy wandering around. He was looking for me. I hopped their fence and hid in their yard. I'm sure they wouldn't mind. I spent another 5 minutes looking through the hole in their fence, watching the guy walk up and down the street. Right when he turned to look for me down another street, I picked up my bike and bolted across the main road, almost getting hit by a car, and unlocked my house, throwing my brother's bike into the garage and locking the house back up. I was panting and looking out the window. I've been sitting here writing this for a good 30 minutes by the window and he hasn't walked by. I think he gave up on me. So I wasn't that into Pokemon Go, and after this I don't think I'll ever play it again. I should have just taken a nap like I usually do.
Hey everyone, hope you enjoyed the video. As you can tell, my voice is pretty gone, so I couldn't make the video as long as I wanted it to be. I was going to explain my recent health issues at the end of this video, but I don't think I can now. Basically, it just got a million times harder than it already was for me to make videos, and I'm really struggling right now. I'll probably just explain everything that's been going on during the 400k Q&A live stream. Please make sure you're following me on Twitter because that's where I'll be announcing when that's happening, and that's also where the questions are going to be asked for the most part. Last but not least, I'm sorry if these stories were pretty tame to you. The game came out only very recently and a ton of disturbing things have already happened. This video was just supposed to be a quick video for you guys since you voted for it on Twitter, but I kinda got sick in between and couldn't include as many stories as I wanted to. I do believe every story I told has a lesson though, and I'm glad that the people that sent me them are okay. Thanks for watching and have an awesome day. Team Mystic.
I was 15 at the time and in the capital city of Kansas. Don't even start with the Wizard of Oz jokes. I was hanging around a group of people I regularly hung out with at the time. The day was slow and cloudy, like really dark type cloudy. We actually had a huge storm the night after or some shit like that. But anyways, with it being such a slow day, we really wanted to get fucked up. We were at my friend's house. For the sake of the story and protection of my friends, let's just call him Tyler. Well, anyways, we were at Tyler's house. Tyler, our friend Josh, and I decided we should go get some weed and a little extra hardcore shit on the side. Coke. It was mostly for Tyler, as he was into the more hardcore types of drugs. We hit up our dealer and do the usual and let him know what we were looking for. Turns out, he hadn't upped his supply recently and we had to go through one of his contacts, which was immediately sketchy as fuck, as I only like going through people I know personally. It's really just a matter of not being ratted out or some bullshit like that. We got his contact info, hit him up, and oh boy, lucky us, he had exactly what we were looking for. So we set our deal up, and by that point it was super late at night. I honestly just wanted to get high and get the fuck home. We decided that the poorly lit skate park a few blocks from Tyler's place would be a wonderful spot to meet up. We took our time to get there as we had a bad rep around that part of town. To sum up why we had a bad rep, we stole a fuckload of fireworks a few 4ths ago and the cops came into the neighborhood and busted all of us. Anyways, back to the story. We eventually get there and we had to wait for the guy to show up, which is immediately more sketchy, as I like for my dealer to be there at the same time as I am. Eventually, a blacked out vehicle with no lights on rolls up behind the park and a group of people step out of it. We wait in the skate park for them to get up to where we were sitting, which is also the area with the least amount of light. A man stepped up to us first, who must have been the dealer, and he was dressed in dark clothing. In fact, from what we had seen back when they first got out, they all were. Just as we were about to trade off, his group of friends, who we obviously weren't paying enough attention to, managed to sneak up behind us and placed objects which we all described as what felt like a gun onto us and told us to empty our pockets. We were being fucking robbed. I knew the whole thing was a sketchy ass thing to do, but we set up the deal anyways. They took Tyler and Josh's phones and wallets, which were loaded with info and cash. And now, I was the center of the fucking freak show at the circus. I told them I had nothing in my pockets, which I didn't. I don't take valuables to deals. Only money, and that's if I'm the one carrying it. As they're all surrounding me getting ready to beat the fuck out of me, Tyler attempts to disarm one of their weapons and fails, which results in him being stabbed. They then fled and left us all there. Josh and I had to help Tyler to his house and called 911. We said it was an incident in the kitchen. I found out a few days later that their phones were sold and people started coming to Tyler's house at strange hours. Tyler has since moved and Josh has ended up in prison for a situation he shouldn't have been involved in. I haven't talked to any of them in over 3 years. Moral of the story, don't go to deals that you don't trust yourself. Or, you know, you could just like not go to deals at all, that'd be good too. I'm a 17-year-old Hispanic female, but at the time that this happened, I was 14 and this took place in Texas. I had recently gotten out of a mental health hospital and was diagnosed with chronic depression, bulimia, and body dysmorphia. The only way I felt loved or appreciated was by having sex with older men and doing drugs. It was summer and I was about to start high school. I was invited to a party with some of my older friends, Vanessa, Callie, and Jackie. I knew my mom wasn't going to let me go to a party after I got caught having sex with a 20-year-old at my cousin's quinceañera, so I lied and said I was going to spend the night at one of my friend's houses. She let me go, seeing as I hadn't left the house since I got back from the hospital, and even let me stay with my friend for 2 days. I thanked her and went to my room to get my stuff ready. A few hours later, my friend Vanessa picked me up and my mom gave me $45 just in case we went shopping or we wanted to order a pizza or something. As soon as I got in her car, I smelled weed. She smiled at me with low, red eyes and threw me a pack of strawberry swishers and some weed, then told me to roll one for us. I did, and we went to pick up my other friends. After we got Jackie, we went to Callie's house to get dressed and then we were on our way. I was pretty high and didn't realize that we had left town and we were going to Dallas. When we got there, I found it odd that it was just me, my 3 friends, and Jackie's boyfriend, who was 21 and she was 17. I didn't say anything, thinking more people were probably just coming later. At the time, all I had really done in the past was smoke weed and drink. My friends knew that, so they told me I didn't have to do anything else if I wasn't ready. But I wanted so bad to seem cool in front of them and Jackie's boyfriend. Plus, I was getting bored just sitting there drinking while Callie and Vanessa were snorting coke. They told me that they had a dealer that gave them an 8-ball for a pretty cheap price. They called up the guy and said that they can meet up at his place since he was on house arrest. We got into Quan's car, which is Jackie's boyfriend, since he had a van and we could all fit inside of it. We were on our way and Callie was rolling up another blunt. I got higher than I've ever been in my entire life. They told me that this was the strongest strain they ever had too, and to just relax so nobody would trip out. I was giggling at nothing. My entire body felt like I was vibrating and I felt like we were floating. When we got there, I could barely walk. My legs felt like jello, so Callie helped me walk since she needed help walking too. We knocked and went inside. I think there were around 6 guys, all in their mid-20s. One caught my attention. He looked out of place. He was dressed way better than the other guys and was very attractive. I guess he noticed me too and came up and started talking to me. He asked me what my name was and my age. I told him the truth and his eyes got big. I felt awkward and asked him how old he was.
I'm 24, but don't worry, I'm not a pedo,
he said with a chuckle. I didn't care since I had been with 20-year-olds before. I looked over at my friends and they were all laughing and talking to the guy who was on house arrest, but I didn't pay attention. The guy asked me if I wanted to sit down on the couch with him. My legs still felt like jello, so I nodded and sat down. He sat down next to me and said,
"I'm Kodak, by the way."
I smiled and he scooted closer. I guess he noticed that I was tensing up and he said,
"I'm not trying to make you uncomfortable. I just think you a fine little Spanish girl."
I felt myself blush and I said, "No, it's okay. I'm not uncomfortable. I'm just really high and I feel like time is going in slow motion." He laughed and I felt stupid for saying that.
"Do you want to go to my room and lay down for a sec?"
I said sure, not wanting to make a fool out of myself in front of the other guys there. I told my friends I'll be back and they said okay and kept talking and laughing. I was holding on to the wall and he said,
"Don't worry, baby girl, I got you,"
and grabbed me by the waist and took me to his room. I sat on his bed and he sat next to me. I could tell he wanted to kiss me by how close he was to my face and his hand rubbing on my thigh. I really wasn't in the mood for more than kissing, so I just kissed him hoping he would be satisfied with that and let me rest. He stood up and I thought that was it. My eyes were very low, so I didn't notice him taking off his shirt until I heard his belt being undone. I looked up at him and he smiled at me. I couldn't understand what was going on. I wanted to say no, but I couldn't. He took off my pants and got on top of me. He kissed me and was touching me. As soon as he tried unbuttoning my jeans, I screamed. He put his hand over my mouth and my friends were too busy laughing in the living room so nobody heard me. He told me to shut up or he was going to shoot my brains out. I bit his hand and he hit the side of my head with something hard. This is where I blacked out for a few minutes or seconds, I couldn't tell. I woke up only to see him putting on a condom and being almost completely naked. He didn't know I was conscious again and I got up and tried to run, but my underwear was still around my ankles. He saw me get up and tried to run after me, but he was looking for something in the covers. I managed to pull up my underwear and grab my jeans and ran out screaming. My friends were in shock and the guy who was on house arrest was too. They all paused to look at me and I told them he tried to rape me. He came out of his room stumbling over my shoes, wearing only black gym shorts and socks. That's when we all ran for the door and went outside. Quan grabbed his keys out of his pocket and we all jumped in. Callie was the last one to get in, and as soon as she closed the door, we heard 2 gunshots and bolted out of there. I was crying hysterically and they were trying to calm me down. We drove fast, and when we were at a stoplight, something hit us from the back. It was Kodak and his friends with guns out of their black car. They had been following us without their headlights on. I screamed at Quan to hurry, and he did. We swerved and ended up losing them on a busy street. Let's just go back to my house and you girls can go home. I'll switch cars and follow behind you guys just in case, said Quan. I didn't want to argue. I just wanted to go back to Vanessa's house and sleep everything off. We got to his house and Callie, Jackie, and I went into Vanessa's car while he switched cars into an old beat-up black Acura. Quan followed us home and, thankfully, the other guys didn't follow us. We took the long way back to Arlington and took a lot of turns just in case. Quan stayed with us since it was around 2 a.m. and he was tired. We got into Vanessa's house and, being the hippie she is, she made some lavender and chamomile tea. We went to Vanessa's room upstairs so that we wouldn't wake up her parents, and they asked me what happened. I told them everything, and then Quan said, I know why they followed us. We all looked at him as he pulled out what looked like an ounce of cocaine from his hoodie. He had apparently slipped it in his pocket while they all turned around to look at me when I came out screaming. You dumbass, we could have gotten killed, said Jackie. He had just stolen a ton of money's worth of cocaine. That's why they went after us. We got calls and threats for weeks because of that. It eventually stopped when Jackie called and left an anonymous tip to the police and they got arrested. To this day, I haven't told my parents what happened. I still have nightmares about that night. This story took place many years ago. My brother used to be a big-time drug dealer. If he didn't sell what you wanted, he knew someone who could get you what you wanted. He had a contact in Mexico who said he could hook him up with a well-known former Citizens member out of Arizona. He was supposed to be in the secret witness program, but was no longer a part of it. My brother called the number given to him, and the man on the phone requested a very large amount of ecstasy pills. My brother had to make a call, but was sure he could get it for him. After a few more phone calls, my brother had secured the deal. He would make a set large amount of money in the process as well. 2 days later, the son and a friend of the former gang member flew in and my brother met up with them. As they're driving to the Connect's house, they informed my brother that there was a change in plan. They tell my brother that they have no intention of paying for the pills and my brother is going to help them, or else. They then explained the plan to my brother. They arrived at the house and found the Connect along with his grandma there. The son pulled out a gun and told the Connect to have a seat next to his grandma. They told my brother to tie them both up. He did, but he gave a look to the Connect to let him know that he wasn't doing this willingly. When he tied them up, he made sure to tie the Connect up real good, but not the grandma. He whispered to her that she was going to be okay, but to sit still. The son told the Connect to tell him where the ex was. He told the son to go fuck himself. The son laughed and asked again. Again, he told the son to go fuck himself and laughed. The son was not happy with this, so he ordered my brother to hit him. My brother knew he had to, so he hit him, hard. He busted the guy's nose and blood sprayed everywhere. My brother felt bad, but knew that it had to be real or else he'd suffer the same fate. The son asked the Connect one more time, "Where's the ex?" He told him to go suck his friend's dick. This time, the son pulled a gun out, told my brother to shoot him, and handed him the gun. My brother told the son, "Look, if we kill him, we'll never find the pills." The son said, "We won't be killing him, you will, and if you don't, we'll kill you. Do you understand? What's it gonna be, kill or be killed?" Just then, the grandma saw her chance and hauled ass out of the front door. They told my brother to go grab her. He went after her but ensured that she kept ahead of him.
As soon as she was far enough out and screaming for help and my brother saw that she was going to be okay, he ran to his car and got out of there and didn't look back. He came home, packed a bag, told us what had happened, and then left town. I had always stayed out of his business. I absolutely hated what he did. And now something serious had happened and I was sure it would come to our house. I became paranoid. Every car I heard outside became their car coming to kill us. I knew who these people were, and killing us would be nothing to them. After about a week of nothing but paranoid sightings, my brother came home. The first night he was home, we were all mostly relaxed. I say mostly because after all of this, I was never relaxed. At about midnight, we all went to bed. I finally fell asleep after about an hour. I hadn't been asleep very long when I was jarred awake by a loud crash and then yelling. I ran into the living room only to see fire. My mom and I got it put out. That's when we realized that it appeared someone threw a Molotov cocktail at our big living room window. I started to call 911, but my brother made me hang up. He said that I couldn't call. That's when I knew I couldn't live here anymore. Our lives would always be in danger. I moved out a week later.